Hello. I actually like how Jacob says shalom, shalom. Yeah, I'm going to be here for 2 hours or so. And I guess different things we could discuss. Some family versus ideology, um, the religious component and how it's getting pushed to synagogues. Yeah, so I'm going to be discussing those items and things like that. I could also speak a little about the weekly Bible portion that we read over on Sabbath. Some thoughts I had about Abraham, Isaac, but we'll see. Yeah, a few different topics I thought we could discuss. And people want to join, there's a link that I added. Howdy, Rabbi. I hope all is well, sir. I don't believe we met. You're also welcome to join. Mm-hmm. I am not subbing for Jacob. I don't know if you're aware, but Jacob has offered graciously his channel to do streaming on. He would like to have something like a 24-hour network channel that has different people speaking on it. And so far, there's been actually a nice amount of people joining and doing this. I've been doing a few of these, and I take these. I took this little slot right now, and I guess I'm waiting for more people to join. Sometimes people are going to join and have a discussion, and yeah, open to have conversations with people, talk about religion, talk about the meaning crisis, and as much as I can, assist, help, learn myself. That would be the general agenda. Okay, you're under the weather. I'm very sorry to hear that. As we say, refuah shlema. You have a full and speedy recovery. I was thinking a little as we get into these weekly portions of the Bible, so a lot of the good stories. Um, I'm thinking, well, I guess we'll start with Abraham. Just when he in Brit Ben Abetarim, when he is making his pact, his covenant with God, there's a line. There's there's a verse that says, "Vayotze oto achutza, ויאמר הבט נא השמיימה וספור הכוכבים, אם תוכל לספור אותם, ויאמר לו, כה יהיה זרעך." Then in the vision, God took him outside and said, "Look towards the heaven and count the stars, if you are able to count them." And there's something about when it says over here, and God took him outside. And I guess one could look at this as actually took him outside to, left his tent and looked at and gazed up to the sky. But I'm sort of connecting this to Moses when at the cleft of the rock, when he's asking to see God's glory. And God said, "You can't, you could only see my back," right? And we learn from that, you could see me sort of in history. But I'm sort of connecting that to this thing about God take him outside, sort of like a zoom out view. If you can imagine, Abraham's having a hard time understanding how all these things are relevant, and like, I'm going to be you're going to be sending my descendants to slavery. How is he okay with all this? How is he sort of chill with all this? And like, for example, during this covenant, he's being told that his descendants are going to suffer, yet he seems to be fairly relaxed. And while what happens with Saddam comes up, he's up in arms, challenging God. Why did he feel the need to do that here? And I'm thinking back about took him outside, is sort of took him out of himself, give him like a meta view, a bird's eye view of the whole situation. And once Avram could sort of fully comprehend, I don't know if he fully comprehended, but get a better grasp of God's greater plan, he sort of was relaxed about this pact and its ramifications down the line. So this is something I'm thinking about. If any of that made sense or didn't make sense, you guys are welcome to let me know. Howdy, Aaron. I hope all is well, sir. Another thing I was thinking about in that vein, I guess, is with regards to Isaac. Vehi ki zaken Yitzchak v'tikahen enav v'merot v'yikra et Esav beno hagadol v'yomar alav beni v'yomar alav hineni. When Isaac was old and his eyes were too dim to see, he calls his son Esau. So there's something about that as well, which I'm comparing this or contrasting this to when Adam and Eve eat, so to speak, from the forbidden fruit, and their eyes are opened up. There was a fascinating conversation between Bernardo and Jonathan Peugeot about the fall from heaven. And Bernardo had an interesting take on that, which was more specific about eating the fruit is, from a scientific point of view, you're seeing humans' development, evolution into metacognition, and sort of leaving the world of instinct, which brings them to where we are today and the ramifications of that. But when I look at the Tikahena and his eyes were dim, it makes me think about, it's more than just a physical dimness, but maybe post the experience he had with his father and being brought up on the altar as a sacrifice, even though that didn't happen, it would require a tremendous amount of belief and sort of, like to sort of push down your own feelings about what you're doing. Isaac is giving himself up toward this idea. He doesn't have this relationship with God yet his father does. And you have to imagine that there was, there was potentially like a PTSD effect on Isaac. There's other indications of this sort of when he's out praying in the field, and you could see that maybe there's some sort of meditative transformation in him where he sort of needs to now connect to God in a different way. However, more specifically about this verse, you could say that post sacrifice with Abraham, he went to a place where he no longer sees good and evil in the same way, sort of pre-forbidden fruit status, and he can't see the difference between Isaac and Jacob in a certain way. And that's difficult for him to comprehend. And that's why when he ends up finding out, how is it translated over here? He ends up finding out that what happened with the blessings, and his world falls apart. And you could potentially say that he suddenly realized, it dawned on him how skewed his vision was. So yeah, I'm thinking about that as well. I see a lot of howdies over here. Howdy, Aaron. Howdy, Rabbi Rafi. But there's another Tifakach Ne'ehem, I think, with Hagar and Ishmael, right? When she goes to the well. I mentioned this earlier. I was talking about the well And I was talking about Yishmael becoming an archer and the psychological aspects of that in the verse. But also there it says the angel opened up her eyes. And I remember I mentioned this earlier that when Abraham sends Hagar out, seemingly it sounds like crazy, like he just sent her out to die. He must have known there's a well nearby and sent her to like a known location. And maybe when it says like the angel opened their eyes, it's, she's in this crazy panic with her son. And I mean, we even in humans experience this, like you could be in a panic and not see what's right in front of you. And sometimes you need to learn how to relax and be back in the moment and gain control to see around you. I wonder if that relates also to the JP Jordan Peterson move with the copper snake with the exposure therapy, right? Like just seeing it allows you sort of to get over that. And here too, you sort of see the Bible giving you even a certain psychological insight of a person's a person's mode when he's in a panic, and how you could become blind when you're in that state. Yeah, I really love these portions of the Bible. So rich with so much just dense with information. It was nice to see Bernardo, back to this conversation with Jonathan Peugeot, see him just being flabbergasted by the insight that the Bible has. I mean, he recites it as 2,000 years ago in Babylon, this is being written. But even then, he's saying the tremendous amount of inspiration one would need to be able to write a story like the creation. Truly divinely inspired. We read, okay, let's see. Aaron, we read from Nehemiah at church today. I'm not sure what we are talking about. I was specifically talking about Abraham and the covenant he had with God, and sort of some of the verses over there, and also comparison between Isaac's eyes, the contrast between Isaac's eyes going dim and Adam and Eve's eyes opening up, and sort of the differences over there. That's what I was discussing. With regards to Nehemiah, also fascinating. Ezra and Nehemiah, the scribes, very impactful on Judaism, sort of almost like a second mini Sinai, just them post exile. The Jews are coming back. Many of them don't even know Hebrew. It's hard to believe. Once they start reading from the parchment, from the Torah, people start crying because this is information they've never heard before. We're definitely me. I'm very fortunate. How many called Sifrei Torah, scrolls of Torah we have in our synagogue. It was highly uncommon to have any around. Just the king had one. And what we also find out later in the Bible that that there was many portions of time that there was no scroll to be found. They didn't even know what was written inside. So just to think about how impactful that was for them to sort of hear these words again that ring true to them, but in some way also don't sound familiar to them. They weren't aware of them. I use this as an example many times, saying that today in Israel, we are far more religious than let's say the Jews were or the Israelites were at the time of Ezra and Nehemiah coming back post first temple destruction and exile. I was also thinking as part of the meaning crisis, and I guess any of you that are listening could let me know. But how much how much of this is, I guess, ideology versus family? And to expand on that, I mean, it definitely growing up. We have Mark over here. Hello, sir.
Hello.
How was your day?
You said meaning crisis. I'm like, all right, I'm in.
I said meaning crisis. Yeah, there was some Bible talk there, but yeah, I guess as far as the meaning crisis, and you could you take it from here, I guess at that point. But I was wondering how much it's ideology versus family, and what I mean is, in the meaning crisis, how much of is there? Let's say we'll take an individual that is feeling this sense of crisis and a lack of meaning, and how much of that is also the fear of, if I act on a certain way off this crisis, what does that mean towards me and my family? I guess this is more of like in a religious context, but how is it true in the States, or specifically with Christians, that the family still has a very strong ideology? I'm asking, and that if one feels in a place of crisis, does he feel comfortable enough to sort of remove himself from the family, knowing that he's still going to be loved by the family? Or is there, if you're dealing with this crisis and we're not, then you're out? And like, does that sort of compound the problem of this crisis? Like, someone feels like, not only do I can't find this answer within, if I go to, let's say, father, pastor, brother, they're like, no, if you're not towing the line, then you're out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I see what you're getting at here. So what I think I want to just take one step back and do some quick sort of framing on meaning crisis stuff. So the way John Vervaeke talks about the meaning crisis, which I find very compelling, obviously, and I have many criticisms of John, but not these, is he talks about it, as part of something, we'll say, bigger than mere religion or mere ideology, right? And so one might think about it as, well, why are there so many ideologies popping up? And you could say, oh, that's part of the meaning crisis, right? Because we need a framework, and we're scrambling for frameworks to give us meaning, and ideologies happen, right? Like, that's one way to think about it. I'm not saying that's the only way to think about it, but he also makes this division in the series about, there's people who are religious who are, like, we'll say, in a meaning crisis, right? But there's a lot of people who are NONESs, right? They don't identify, within that tradition, and within any religious tradition. And because they don't identify with any religious tradition, their crises is of a fundamentally different type, right? And the way I see that, and this is just me, is you have a group of, say, like Bridges of Meaning, for example, right? You have a group of traumatized Christians, and what they need is very, very different from what the NONESs, or what I call the cluelesses, need. So the NONESs could probably be divided as, some of them are traumatized religious folks, whether it be Christian, Muslim, or Jewish, or whatever. But then there's a bunch of people like me who grew up entirely outside of religion. So, which is not to say I didn't go to a Catholic church, but like, that wasn't pushed. And even at Catholic school, and they didn't make us read the Bible, right? Like, so it was like, wait, what? Right? They didn't. So a lot of this language, I don't even have it. Like, when I go on BOM and they start talking about theology, I'm like, I don't know, you guys talking about, I gotta go. Like, I can't keep track.
That's interesting that you're saying that. Jacob had a line in one of our conversations that he said, like, your FFB or RFG, religious from birth. From birth is just like a Jewish word for that. So I had to, my sort of knee-jerk reaction was like, listen, Jacob, like, okay, I could sort of remove myself from myself, right? I could think sort of, or try to attempt to think what a secular person would think. And I mentioned sort of, and I guess it was just more of a, like a defense mechanism. Like, I have like secular siblings, and like, however, I understand, like you're pointing out that it really is sort of a different frame. And in many ways, I'm very privileged in a certain extent. And I'm sure there's other, that I have this framework to work with. On the other hand, you could say that like I'm sort of, closed within this framework and it's hard to see sort of what's out there. But I guess, and this relates to the meaning crisis, which is, like you just said, bridges of meaning is a very specific type, I guess. And maybe I'm wrong, but I have a sense that it's more religious. Am I wrong about that?
No, it is. It is. And just to back this up. So one of the struggles I had for a couple of years was I was trying to explain what the meaning crisis, trying to define the meaning crisis for my aunt and my uncle. My uncle passed away last a year ago. Yeah, it was not good. He was a wonderful person. He was the type of person that ended every phone conversation with "God bless." Like he was just, that's just the type of person he was. But obviously he was very religious. My aunt's very religious, right? So the rest of the siblings that she has, not going to Catholic church anymore, traumatized by the church, whatever. Fair enough. The stories I've heard, some of them are terrible, although they're not all that bad. But for them, they were really traumatic. But I could not, until very recently, and after many attempts, explain to her what the meaning crisis was. And I'm not sure if she would understand it in the sort of way that we'll say I could even explain it to you, right? So I'm not sure she gets the language of it, like she could talk meaning crisis with people. I'm pretty sure she couldn't. But I knew she got it, right? Because she said, really? There are people like that out there? I'll pray for them. I'm like, well, there you go. Now right? So, which I think is the proper response for somebody like that. Maybe not for everybody. Like maybe there are crazy people like Manuel and myself and others who will dive in and talk to people who are sitting, 4 steps from nihilism, right? And try to work with them and do to varying degrees of success, including mostly not success, right? But that's very different from, in my mind, that's very different from evangelization. It's very different from being, and I might be mischaracterizing what Jacob says, being a priest, right, to the non-priestly class or something, right? To me, and I might be wrong about this, it's a very different thing to be there with those people and try to help them out of it. I
guess just hearing you say that, like I'm looking at you specifically in a whole different light right now, which is, I mean, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but isn't there like another layer of frustration than you have in this specific, setting, which is like, aside from like, guys, listen to me about the meaning crisis, like I also have to deal with, and by I mean Mark, I have to deal with all this Christian religious talk as well. Or do you see that? I guess I'm asking you, like, because it seems to me like Manuel uses that sort of as a tool to have conversations with people via, the same jargon or terminology. Now you could be saying that's fine. John Vervaeke is clearly, and the conversations that John Vervaeke and Jonathan Pageau are trying to have that, like, meet in the middle with, what these terms mean to each other with regards to understanding them. I wonder how much, well, I guess we see that with Paul, though. It seems like he's trying to integrate John Vervaeke, right? But again, via the religious prism. Do you agree with that move that Paul's doing? And that doesn't mean that you're saying like, live and let live. Like I know you're fine with it, but like my question is, are you endorsing that? And you don't have to answer that if that's too specific. Yeah,
no. I think so. The framing that you're missing is one of my messages, and there was the last Q&A, Friday Q&A that Paul did before he basically went on vacation was actually with Manuel. And so it's on his channel. I forget when it was. Was it May? Was it June? I don't remember, but it was back then. And they had a lovely talk. It was really, really good talk. And then we got a question in the middle from one of the BOMers that at the time at least was spending a lot of time on BOM. And I felt compelled to jump in, and I jumped in, and Paul was gracious enough to be appreciative of my framing and the way I put it. But basically what I was saying is, as a Christian or a Jew even, you can go and you can say, why is Vervaeke making up words? Because he's making up words, and you guys already have words for that. Absolutely, like fair enough, right? But the reason why he's making up the words and this is what's really important. The concepts that he's running into now, like really late in life, like really, really late in life, because I think he's, getting up there, right? Right. Those concepts are new to him, right? They're not new to me, although I don't have the religious language. Aha! You don't need the language. The language isn't that important, right? That's the key, right? So, but those concepts, forget about the language. Well, oh yeah, he doesn't have the concept. Like actually doesn't understand the concept, right? And so the bridging the gap is important, but it's important that you meet people where they're at, because if you come at them with Christian or Jewish language, they can't understand any of it because they don't have the concepts behind the language. Sorry to go on so long, Chad.
Not at all. And sorry, Chad, go ahead. I was going to ask something, but please take it away.
I was just waving hello to Michael.
Oh, hey, Michael.
Hi, everybody.
Michael, I also actually later on, I wanted, I wrote a note here to myself if you jumped on, but I wanted to talk about your program, school. But Mark, something you were saying, so you're saying John Vervaeke, right? Now he comes along to this language, right? And let's say us religious folk are like, welcome to the party. Great. Now that you have this language, we could have this conversation. Do you think that Sam Harris, we'll use him as an example, is oblivious of that language?
No, concepts. It starts with concepts, right? John runs into these concepts. He makes up new words. And in a religious people aren't like, hey, welcome to the party. They're like, why are you using these strange words? We already have words for that. That really means this. And then they get into a theological discussion. And the problem with that, with somebody like John Vervaeke, is John read the Bible. He can do theology. Like I can't do theology. It's a complete waste. Don't talk theology to me, please. It doesn't work. I can't. I'm not there. I don't have any framing, right? But he can, and he'll beat you over the head with your own theology pretty quickly because he's really, really bright, right? So that's not the correct approach. Correct approach is to meet him where he's at with his language and move him further along the concepts, and then should tie it back to Sam Harris. Sam Harris is this archetype that I've been sort of looking for in history that I haven't quite found, although I found some examples of the articulate idiot. Like there's just stuff he doesn't understand conceptually, and that's obvious. Like if you're not bright enough to understand that you're not going to see God with a telescope, I don't know how far I can get you along the path, but it's not going to be very far, and that's okay because religion has a way to deal with that. But it's good. But we need to note that, right? Because we need to have compassion for somebody who's just not able to understand what to us is a very simple concept, and to him just is too hard for his brain.
It's so simple to be like, why is he not getting this? That it's almost alarming. That it makes you sort of wonder,
Yes.
he must be like 4D chess this, because like I'm just not understanding how he's not getting this. And I mentioned this in an earlier video which is like it seems clear today that they lost. You know what I mean? Like the new atheist that like is just and like it was percolating like 10 years ago. You know what I mean? Like him and the Four Horsemen going around selling their books. And now I just feel like even Paul's review of the Cosmic Skeptic, which is like I saw his conversation about Jordan Peterson. Oh, he's so like enough. Like it's clearly he's not having the conversation at. I don't know. It's almost juvenile in a certain extent, and I don't know. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Chad. Take it away.
When I see this stuff, it reminds me of how. I mean, this is just how people are. I mean, if you could take a New Testament theological trope, which is, they see like the disciples or whatever see Jesus do these things, and then they completely forget. It seems as though they completely forget that he's done these miracles, and then they're always going back to him like, can you show me again? And then he shows them again, then they forget, and then he dies and or is crucified, then he resurrects and nobody recognizes him. It's like, this is a completely human thing. Like, we can't see 100% of everything 100% of the time. And a lot of this stuff, I was actually thinking about this. Like, it seems like Did you guys ever see Stargate SG-1, the show?
Yes.
So what's interesting about that show is there's a thread in that show where everybody's wrestling with religions, but they do like a materialist answer to the religion, but they use the Stargate to go this crew of like somebody's an archaeologist, somebody's a scientist, somebody's a soldier, somebody's an alien who, so you got this group of people who keep going through the Stargate and finding a new culture with a new sets of religion. And then you have, some evil being that's the Goa'uld, who are kind of trying to control everybody. And they're still trying to wrestle with all this stuff and see, I don't know. There's something to that. I know that this is really dumb and probably most people listening to this are thinking, what the hell is he talking about? But think about the Stargate SG-1 model. It's like there's something similar to what we're doing here. We're a bunch of us we have some ideas. We venture off into we use this Stargate. We venture off into some new culture and or even our own culture, which is new to us in some ways. And we're wrestling with all these questions. And we just constantly... You could be given the answer in full right now, and you'll forget it in 10 minutes. I think that's just kind of how we are. And I think there's something really strong to pay attention to as far as that goes.
Thanks, Chad.
Yeah, and one of my complaints that you probably haven't heard is that the church is receded. And that's sort of, to some extent, I think Jacob's talking about too, right? The Jewish priest class has receded, right? And they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. I think the churches have receded. And I often use the example that in South Carolina, all of the hospitals were owned by religious orders, and now none of them are, right? So that's, and there were many more Catholic schools when I was growing up than there are now, right? Those are small examples, but I think that if you take it on the totality, where the church has said, okay, government, okay, Caesar, right? You can run charity, which you can call welfare, you can call it whatever you want, call it UBI. You run all that stuff, and we'll stop doing that. That's a recession. That's a moving away from. And that's part of the problem that I complain about, is that you guys left the congregation. The congregation didn't leave you.
So, Michael, I want to sort of use this to sort of springboard into what you were doing. I'm gonna just give what I understand you were doing. Let me know, obviously, if you're representing this.
Sure.
And it sort of relates to what Mark was just saying, more specific in the Jewish frame, but we'll expand on that. So, Michael, from what I understand, would like to open up some sort of school, workshop, and where students could come, assuming it's co-ed, and I'm not exactly sure about the ages, but students could come and actually work with their hands. So they'll do different manual labor, and while doing so, having some sort of framework, which is religious / biblical, which they could see how biblical narratives and messages can be embodied in actual day-to-day work. Am I getting that right? Or
yeah, I think that's the basic concept of it.
Okay.
And I'm designing it so it's very like open source and adaptable. Like, I have like my specific version that I think I would actually run, but then hopefully I can just give the information and other people could do it slightly different ways. But
okay, so I guess let's say we'll keep that general idea up here for a second.
Yeah, so just apprenticeship.
Asking if that's possible. I'm sure there could be a model like that. So I'm just looking at some of my notes of here. Okay, so I had over here that it feels like in Judaism, and you'll let me know if this makes sense to you guys. There's been sort of a push of all the religious life to basically be inside the synagogue, and again, it's unique to Israel. But if we'll think about the Babylonian Jew for a moment, and he has to deal with dietary restrictions and agriculture restrictions, and there's a tremendous amount of rules and regulations that the Bible, the Torah, gives us, and that would really allow one to really embody and connect sort of to God whether he's planting seeds or making his clothing and all. If on the Sabbath where you could carry your different things in your hand. So there's a tremendous amount of thing that the Bible and the Torah had covered. However, in 2022, all my agriculture is already is being taken care of on a sort of from the government, state, and religious. All those things are taken care of, and it's the same with. You're not allowed to sell swine in religious neighborhoods. So like, I don't even have to worry. Like, I've never seen that even in Jerusalem. So all these things have sort of been, I don't have to really participate in them anymore because they've been taken care of. And I sort of live my life in that way, but not really ever embodying it in a certain extent. So like, if there was like, I could check the boxes of like, yes, I took care of this dietary restriction, but there was no conscious point of me, being aware of that. However, when it comes to, let's say, the daily prayers and blessings, those are still relevant, so to speak, and that happens inside the synagogue. Even though like Corona definitely whittled to that as well. So I think about like a school that you're doing, and I wonder to myself, in a certain extent, like I want to tell my son, you're going to learn about this in Bible studies, about all these agricultural things, but they're not relevant anymore. Not because you can't do them, because you're never going to have to be dealing with them. However, if you want to feel like this embodied feeling again, then you've got to sort of infuse life back into it. So it could be go to Michael's school and work on the land for a year. And then like you could actually re-engage those things again. And that would be specifically like from a biblical perspective, but it could also be just, like going back and rereading our stories and then seeing the lesson that could be learned from that. And then like, how is Jacob dealing with like making these wells? And then like, what does that mean to us today? So I guess, I don't know if any of that makes sense, but this is sort of.
Yeah, that's like kind of exactly the way I was thinking it, and I was thinking like, yeah, so, I was just thinking, cause I'm a carpenter, so that's what I'm doing all the time. But, and part of this is because, I went to Bible school and like, basically I actually went to two different types of Bible school. One which was more like a internship program based in a big church, and the other one was a traditional college. And both of them leave their graduates severely underprepared to actually go and be a pastor of a church. And but
I'm just going to ask,
yeah,
I'm prepared to be a pastor of a church, or how about, are you at least prepared enough to embody what you learned? Like, let's say they're not a good leader. Are they coming out with quote unquote, like, is their toolkit upgraded?
It's in some areas, but very limited. So like in the internship kind of model, I would say the people there had a better understanding of like how to build a team and how to work with people. It was kind of like a discipleship model. So it was very much about like, you're going to spend time with me, and through that process, you'll become more godly, and then you can go spend time with, some kids and they'll become more godly. And that kind of worked. They just didn't have a lot. Like, I would say the thing that were lacking there was their actual Bible study skills, which that's where the college survived well, but they didn't really have a lot of people skills. But then also they unless if they had the experience from like high school or something, just of like working a full-time job, like that's just basic life skill that like a lot of people don't have. And you could get that from anything that's difficult. But I think, building stuff, growing stuff, and dealing with people, relationships, like those are the main kind of categories of things that are given as examples of like experience in the Bible. Like Noah was a builder, and Moses, led building the tabernacle, and then once they're in the land, everybody's a farmer basically, or you're tending sheep, and then it's all about the relationships that people have, husbands, fathers, sons, so if you don't have experience like with healthy, good versions of like any of that stuff, well, then you're going to have a meaning crisis. So,
so the way I think about it, Michael, because I just want to, I want to add a little framing. The way I think about it is what you seem to be doing, which I very much agree with, is you're adding framing to action. Okay.
mm-hmm.
So it's the opposite move of postmodernism. Postmodernists carve things up kind of randomly.
Yep.
They think it's not random, it's random. They carve things up randomly, and then you break an important connection that you didn't know about because you're a Muppet like everybody else. And like, who knows what's important? We don't know, right? And then you're trying to re-enchant, right? Or reinflate or whatever. No, this action that you're doing, this participation, this participatory knowledge, to use some fancy Vervaeke words, is embedded within this tradition over thousands of years. And so you're putting the words, the proposition type learning, back together with the framing of the biblical structures, right? And that, to me, that allows for the re-enchantment, because it's not like everybody's talking about relationships. It was one of the things, somebody mentioned the DC Schindler talk that Vervaeke did with Ken Lowry, and I just finished it today. It's freaking excellent. But one of the things they're missing is they're talking about attachment style, and they're not talking about what you're attached in and what the attachment is for, right? So they're talking about the relationship and pointing at that as an object, which I very much disagree with. They're not really talking about what's the participation and where are you participating and what are you participating to do, right? Because it, roughly speaking, in a religious frame, that would be to manifest the glory of God or something along those lines, right? And we don't have that sense because we've divorced education from participation, made it purely propositional or mostly propositional. I have a video on that on my channel, Navigating Patterns, just saying education versus training, right? But what we need to do is reinflate that or re-enchant it and put the framing that's worked for us for thousands of years without the proposition back into the proposition.
So you said a key word there, which is enchantment. I forgot who this person is. She spoke to Jordan Peterson. She spoke to a few other people about enchantment theory. And she had this.
Yeah, is that Chloe Valdry?
Maybe. And it was really, if I recall correctly, she had this conversation about if she could get liberal, like progressives and Republicans, she had them with, like, you could get them in a club and you could get them dancing first. And then like an hour in, you're like, okay, let's have this conversation. It'd be too late. Like they've been enchanted into like, we've been already dancing together one-on-one, our body, like our heart rate's sort of connected. And this also relates to stories. I think a study just found out that if you are reading a story and like it could be a crowd of 10,000 people, it could even be people not in the same room, their heartbeats sync as the story now, which is crazy. Now, obviously that could be manipulated very well, but like it's sort of a deeper level that you sort of got to get like past like sort of classic cognition into like this like embodied place where then like it's hard to sort of escape that in a certain extent, which relates, Michael, and this also relates to what Mark is saying about like, how do we actually do that? How are you actually doing this embodiment? Or you were saying you have this tradition that these values are like, are embedded inside. So in Jewish thought, you have two schools of thought in the Talmud, which there's the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai. And the school of Shammai was always more strict, and school of Hillel was always more lenient. And ultimately, the school of thought of Hillel was saying that you should be taking the mundane and be sanctifying it. And the school of Shammai was nervous that you're going to be taking holy and basically downgrading it. And an example of this would be that according to the school of Hillel, one could wear his phylacteries and take them into the restroom. And according to the school of Shammai, they'd be like, absolutely not. How can you take such a divine thing into that kind of room? Now, the heavenly spirit in the Talmud comes out, says like, that we will always go according to Rav Hillel. And that's sort of what was decreed, what was decided. However, on the ground, the way we live our life is very much in Judaism is very much like the school of Shammai. Even though he lost, we still do not embody it fully because there's this fear of I'm taking the sacred and I'm downgrading it. The question is, and this relates to Michael, is do you want to also be creating like, it's not like there doesn't have to be that separation, whether it like flows all the way through, and like you are just constantly sanctifying what you're doing, and not, there's no version of you like downgrading it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think that a part of the there's this tendency with like time and tradition to always make more and more things sacred, and then it becomes like unwieldy a little bit, like like, because I come from like a very simple church background. I'm not Orthodox, I'm not Catholic, but like they have like all this traditional stuff, and like, they have the cathedrals and the icons and the statues and all this like tradition. And if something's, it gets like unwieldy a little bit too much. And I think that there is obviously there is some value in that sacredness, but it can kind of, it goes too far to where you get to that place where you don't know, like, what can I question, like, what, you don't, where you, if it's really easy for you to inadvertently do something wrong without knowing, that's not a good system, because if you need to have years and years and years of education about what you can't do before, there's no room left for the freedom for you to like learn or experience anything. So, I do remember hearing that Jesus, I think they said Jesus, on most of his decisions, he was like 80% of the time he was siding with Rabbi Hillel. But so it wasn't the same, and so he supported the, he did have that balance. He did have both sides, but it was very heavily on the favor of spiritualizing the mundane, I guess you could say, or I like to think about it as like redeeming it. We're redeeming these things and making them sacred again. So
I like this idea of, let's say, the school, and because the last few conversations we had, which I don't want to dive deep into them about, like, what are we doing? What's this meaning? I was sort of feeling like this urge of like, let's move forward then. Let's not talk about like, what, like, about like, where is this going, but try to actually move towards something, right? So I hear about the school, and obviously that sounds interesting. I also hear about, Chad, and this relates to you, but you had your little, and not little, it's 22 minutes, but you had this this little documentary you did about this little corner of the internet.
Yeah.
And it ends with come play, I think, or let's play. Yeah. And it made me think about just like in Proverbs, how like in Proverbs 119, there's like 8 different verses that talk about playing. I mean, I think the translation in English is delight, but in Hebrew it's playing. And I was also wondering how maybe there's something to that about like a playfulness that is also very enticing in a certain way to people, and how that could be utilized properly. I'm not sure how, but I just think like there's something about that word when you said come play, which was like a lot more inviting than, let's say, I don't know. I just think I've never been to an estuary, but when I think of estuary, I don't think like come play.
Well, okay, so I can't talk real long. I'll just say it real quick. A lot of the come play and the ideas around my channel and the things that I noticed, like guys like Grizz doing, and Chris, and even Michael does this. There's a play aspect, which reminds me a lot of like childlike faith. There's something that can happen when things become too rigid. If you guys have not seen the latest conversation that Karen Wong had with Ulysses, if you go to the Meaning Code and watch that conversation, you could see what happens to somebody who is caught in something that's too rigid. And it's heartbreaking. And it's also, I think I've seen some of that in my own life. But he talks about being born into a family that recently moves into, I think it was Jehovah's Witness, and so he, they didn't have holidays and stuff, and he even started getting into music, and he got really great at it, and he was in his 20s, and they wanted him to give up his music. And it's like, so there's things that's why play is important. And play isn't everything, but it is a major component to this collective sense making. That's like when we were kids and we were out there playing whatever, it was cops and robbers or whatever it was. There was something to that where we're not really focused on the facts about our play. We're in the play, and we're allowing for the play to move further and further. And if things get a little outside of the unnamed rules, like kind of in the Piagetian way, then we say, "Oh, we're doing this." And so, but I think play is huge. I know for me, when I'm caught in the grips of rigid ideological action or belief, and I'm unwilling to move outside of that, it feels like death. And I think so. Like, you started the stream with stories about Isaac and Abraham, and I was thinking about Job, and I'm thinking about Christ, and I'm thinking about all these different characters. And what's happening is God's constantly breaking our rigid vision, and saying, and this is kind of like the rumination thing that Mathieu Peugeot is talking about. It's like rumination can be a form of play too, in a sense, I think. So I'd love to talk more, but I have to clean up the kitchen. But I'm looking forward to listening to this tomorrow. So see you guys.
See you.
Yeah, I'm glad Chad brought in play, because it's an important part of what Jordan Peterson talks about, and it's an important part of what John Vervaeke talks about, right? And I think to some extent, when you're stuck in a materialist frame, right? So that my thesis is still the intimacy crisis, and I've got a video with Andrew at the Bangs on her channel with that, and one on my channel, Navigating Patterns with Catherine, right? When you're stuck in the intimacy crisis, which I think causes the meaning crisis, you're having this material relationship with the world. And the thing about material is that material is rigid. That's like what it is, right? Ideas are not rigid. You can't grab them. And that's part of what Vervaeke talks about. He says, well, look, E equals MC squared is real, but I can't give it to you. I can't flip it around, right? I can't manipulate it the way I manipulate the physical world, the material world, right? And so he's trying to re-enchant to some extent. And this is another great part of his work. He's trying to re-enchant the world, right, by using that formula. So what is the space? What is the difference? Well, there's a space of play. There's a space where you can experiment, and you're not expected to have a known perfect result up front, right? And we've lost that, right? We lost that because we want certainty. But you can have one or the other. You can't have both. Like right, you can't learn unless you can play. Learning and playing are actually the same thing. And we go, no, we've got learning down. We just give you a grade. We give you the books, you read the books, you get the grade. But that doesn't actually work, because then we tell a bunch of people they're smarter than they really are, like Sam Harris.
I think you also see that in, hey, Manuel, we're glad you joined. I think you also see this in when, like you just said, like, children could watch the same show or the same movie again and again and again, right? And
Right.
An adult, aside from music, which managed to pierce its way through, we cannot handle, like, I saw this. I don't need to see this again. Like, I know this. And there's something, and this again relates to the play. There's something that's like more instinctual about it that allows them to like fully engage. And I think, like most people growing up, whether it's like Beauty and the Beast or let's say The Prince of Egypt, they're like, yeah, we're down to watch it all. And at a certain age, we're like, no. But the religious stuff, that's like serious. And like then as that goes on, there's something about it that like someone could take it seriously, but it starts becoming less instinctual. And I can't hear this story again about Jonah, like quote unquote, like I can't hear this anymore. But I mean, in this corner, we talk, they've been talking about Job. Jess has been talking about Job, I think like for 15 years or something like that. Right. So like, so
right. No, well, but
like play.
Yeah, Vervaeke sort of squares that circle too, right? Because he talks about there's a way in which you can engage certain books, and every time you read them, you get more out of them. They're like wells, right? And then there are books that aren't like that, like technical manuals are not like that, right? You can refer to them, right? But maybe if you read them again, there's no depth there. And I think it's that depth, that's that verticality that everybody's finally gotten to. I was like, you guys took too long to get there, but that's the important missing part. That's the enchantment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know though. The technical manuals, maybe they would surprise us, because that's because as I've been kind of working on this project, I've been looking a little bit more at like, and I know Hezi, I'm sure, is aware, like there's been a lot of thought about the detailed instructions that God gives about how to build the tabernacle, and you would think this is like, oh, this is just the stuff that the people that needed to build the tabernacle needed to know. But it's like, well, no, there's actually a lot of really interesting stuff in there, and stuff that we probably can learn things from. So, I mean, I don't know. Even the technical manuals might be worth. There might be more to them than.
Well, no, but John makes this point. It's what it's aimed at, right? Okay. So, in other words, if you're aiming at writing a fictional story about a particular incident to make some money because you're an author, right? That's different from Plato's Republic, which is also a fictional story, right? And so if you have a manual that's aimed at not teaching you, quote, how to build a tabernacle, but how you build a tabernacle to the highest value or virtue or conception, that's a whole different manual from how do I run my microwave? Like my microwave manual has no depth. And it's not supposed to, and it shouldn't. Like, I'm not denigrating these things. We need them, but they fall into two broad classes here. And one of them is this verticality, this important depth. And the other one is the way in which they're shallow and utilitarian. And we're very much a utilitarian society as materialists. And it's that materialism, that individualism, that objectivism that is snuck in. And it's snuck into the churches too. And that's actually really important. Because if you blame modernity, you think, oh, I'll go to an Orthodox church and the problem will be solved. But if it's materialism that's the problem, or individualism or objectivism that's the problem, that's also in the church. So, fighting modernity doesn't work because you're fighting the wrong monster at that point.
Do you feel, Michael, like how much of, and again, I understand that some of this could be like conceptual, but in this school, how much of it do you see it being sort of individual work, and how much is it via group? Because I feel like the more it's sort of obviously one needs his time to really take it all in. However, I do think you really get the most amount of perspectives, and if you're doing it via a group.
So I mean, it obviously depends on how many people are available there, but like my kind of thinking was, maybe it would be something like everybody gets together in the morning, however many people there are, maybe there's like a half a dozen students or so, and maybe have some kind of a lesson, and then go work for the day. Maybe everybody's working spread out, or in pairs of two, or with different teachers or whatever, and have some time to kind of think about it on their own, and then you can get back together and kind of discuss how that day's work helped you process the lesson from the morning or something like that, or or the day before, something like that. But also thinking that like part of this would be because I'm trying to use all of the undervalued resources, and one of them I was thinking like, hey, there's a lot of like people that are experienced businessmen working in the trades who are godly men. They don't get a lot of opportunity in church to be teaching or whatever. Maybe their pastor doesn't say like, oh, would you like, or then maybe they don't feel comfortable like running a group or something, but that's the guy who he also needs to learn this because he can grasp it quicker because he's a mature believer, and then he can help translate it to the students that he's teaching. So simultaneously through the day, he's teaching both how we do the job and how the Bible applies to that, or so that was kind of part of the idea too. So so I mean, yeah, I think it's good to have all those things, some time by yourself, some time with just somebody who's more experienced with you, some time to work things out with your peers. All those are valuable. So
well, and that's ultimately what we're missing, right? Is the framing for our work. People find this is part of the meaning crisis, right? People find their work meaningless. Why do you find your work meaningless? Like, work is so enriching and fulfilling. I'm like, how did you even get there? Like, what happened? What happened to you? Where's the boo-boo, right? Like, what? But what happened is they lost their worldview frame, and so they look at work as an isolated postmodern thing. Well, I'm working, and it's just work, and it's not connected to anything else. It's like, yeah, but work is the thing that allows you to go on vacation, literally. You can't have an enjoyable vacation if you're on vacation all the time. Right? It doesn't happen. Right? Work is the thing that enables you to do a bunch of other things that you like and enables you to appreciate them through the contrast of the work. And there's more. I could go on, right? But because it's not embedded in anything, just postmodernly sort of cut it out, then there's no there's no connection. I disagree with Shari. No, there's no such thing as a bullshit job.
So one second. I want to understand what she's saying over here. Shari, obviously, you're welcome to let us know about so Mark is saying there's no such thing as a bullshit job. So you mean like as long as like you're proud of what you're doing, and obviously assuming that it's a productive job, or you're saying anything goes. No.
You need work. You as a human, as a persons need work. They need work. It's not an optional thing. It's not an optional thing, and therefore there cannot be work that doesn't connect to the rest of life. There can be people who can't connect their work to the rest of life.
So let's
frame the other condition is false.
I would say we have. I'm not going to say that word because of my guest here, but I would say that we do have more jobs that are like that now than we probably ever had in the past. This one wasn't even that bad, but like I worked at a call center and I had to ask people to send back their DirecTV boxes all day long, and like it was basically like 90% of the time it was just leaving the same voicemail over and over again. And I mean, I was reading a book while I was doing it.
That's important. But that's important, because if it doesn't happen, things are worse.
No, I agree. It is important, but I'm saying it's a much bigger stretch to. It's a much bigger stretch to find how what you are doing is important and why it matters that it's you.
Of course,
and it's
and that depends on whether or not you're a materialist. If you're a materialist, a job like that seems pointless. But if you're not a materialist, then the job is connected to the rest of your life. In other words, you can't put it in the chain of materiality and say, well, my calls are only 1% effective, and therefore I could spend my time better doing something else as part of this company or as part of the economy. You can do that, but that's a materialist frame.
Let's frame this with UBI for a second, right? So comes Andrew Yang and says we're giving out the money, right? And I know people looked at this as the stimulus check, but some pushback was listen, you're going to give people X money. And then arguably, right, this job Michael's talking about, right? It's not the surgeon, but it's this job that Michael's talking about. This guy's going to be like, forget that, right? I'm home right now. Now, in that case, you're right. It falls inside the materialist framework where he's like, I don't need this anymore to give me the money. So I'm done with that. Now, the issue is what arguably many people are fearful from. They see that as the beginning of the meaning crisis, right? Then people wouldn't have what to do. And what are people going to do? So now Michael, and I guess I understand Mark's point, because he's saying without that, that sort of in a certain way, get that really gives you, it is important. And even though it's a small cog, it's still creating a difference. Now, with regards to what Michael's saying, he's saying, yes, but let's say that guy didn't have to do that job. Obviously, he'd rather do, those jobs could be very mundane. And arguably, not everyone, while you could say every job potentially is important, not everyone could see the value in the job, even if they really want to.
Right.
Like Michael, I'm sure, really tried to.
It depends where you're looking for the value. If you're looking for the value in materiality, you're screwed. You're done. All jobs are meaningless. All jobs are BS. All of them.
No, I'm not looking for material. Okay,
No. But I'm saying this is where the meaning crisis comes in. And look, we saw this with COVID. Like a bunch of people are now unemployed and they're unhappy. And there's simple things that people don't understand. Like one of them is, and I know this because I did consulting for years. One of them is the amount of money you have when you're working, okay, is insufficient for your needs when you're not working, because you have to keep yourself busy, and that ends up costing money. And so you say, look, we're just going to give you, let's say you make $800 a week, and we're going to give you $1,200 a week. That's not going to be sufficient for you if you stop working 40 hours. It's not going to be sufficient anymore. It's not going to keep you busy enough. Most people, not everybody, but almost everybody. It's not going to keep them busy anymore, because now they need to spend more money in order to feel like they're doing something, because people do things in the world.
Yeah, but you would agree that if all jobs could be equal, not all jobs are. Again, you have to have a very good match then between the person doing the job, right, and like how captivating the job is, how much he could be handling that. Because how are you infusing meaning into what Michael is doing?
Well, look, you can't relate the meaning to the other material things. You can't say
no material things.
I'm a car, right? Well, the meaning is related to what it gives you in your life and how it affects you and your relationship with all the things around you, not how it affects the company you work for.
No company. Forget the company. How it affects me. My point is, Michael could be like, listening, I'm stamping tickets, and like the meaning it's giving me. Like, I get it that it's very important that now these people could take their library books, and now, I'll take a different example. I build homes, okay? It's very difficult for me because I feel like that my job is very materialistic, right? Mm-hmm. These are staircases, these are your faucets. Now I have to it keeps the lights on and gets my kids his fancy shoes, and it answers that, okay? And some of that I used to be like, okay, I could go to dinner with my wife, and now that allows me to take something and that allows me to have some meaning using those material tools to get that meaning. However, I would like to go to work every day, aside from knowing that like I build my own business and it's successful, like I'm doing amazing work. Right now, if I'm a club bouncer, can I tell myself I'm doing amazing work? And what you're saying, Mark, is like, yes, it's still meaningful.
Or if you're a house mover, can you do amazing work and it still be meaningful?
The answer,
or a delivery person, Casey. Imagine being a delivery person stuck in a truck all the time, Casey. How meaningless would that be? And you've upgraded from delivery person, right, to mover. But yeah, I mean, you're doing fine, right? So you're not in the meaning crisis.
It's about, I think you've said this before, maybe. Containers, right? It's nested. Your job is nested in your neighborhood, even your street, your little town if you're in a little town like me, or your neighborhood if you're in a big city, and then the city itself and your country and everything else. It's all nested in that. It's hard to see
the impact. When you're saying a small city, I could easily say how I sense the meaning because I could see it. I could see its effect. If I'm a programmer in the middle of Bangladesh, you know what I mean? Can I feel it outside this room when I have some woman yelling at me in Iowa on the phone while I'm trying to upgrade her, her internet?
Yeah, but what about all those people that volunteer for helping marathons and stuff, and they're glorified traffic cops?
Where are you at, Emmanuel? You're saying what about them? As in, are you asking?
Well,
Mark,
they're volunteering to do that, right? Like that, they're not getting paid. They're one level away, and they're glorified traffic cones.
Or they're handing out cups of water, or they're just saying, "Yeah, go," and completely banal things, literally
Sure.
banal things,
Can
right?
everyone get to their state though? Like I understand that they see meaning at it, and like you said, they're clearly volunteering, right?
I don't, it's not. But it's not seeing meaning. See, this is part of the problem. People are
Well-
like, meaning is not something in your backyard that's hidden under a rock that you can go find. It's not. We co-create or co-manifest meaning, and this is where the confusion is. That's up to us, and this is what I'm saying: is
Can
that
everyone do that?
everything you do can be connected meaningfully, but that's up to you.
No,
I
but
think
what if you do?
the
Every
volunteer
individual can do it.
the volunteering thing that gives people a sense of meaning because they're being approached from, we need you to do this. So like it gives that's meaning, like they're necessary. Like, I mean, to some extent. I mean, I say this in the sense of like, this is why it's kind of shocking how much meaning some of these people seem to derive from these particularly useless tasks. But
it's not shocking at all. Because
no,
again,
it's not. But
right. They
But-
have the meaning. The
but
meaning
it's-
comes first to them.
If you
Manuel, what were you
get
saying?
paid for something, right? Then isn't that someone saying, "I want you to do that"? like isn't that literally what that means?
yeah, but well, okay, so let me put it the way that I'm thinking. So I have started to think meaning crisis is sort of a luxury belief that you get because you've arrived at a place that society or other people have told you is supposed to be a good place to be, and then you found that it is not. Which is why it's a luxury to have a meaning crisis, because you have success. If you are starving or like on the run, or in some, it's actually interesting. They say like whenever like war is happening, like in a country or conflict, like mental health goes way up, because all of a sudden like people clearly see like the necessity of doing basic important things to life, and then they don't have the time to sit around and say like, what is the meaning of all this? But I think what precedes the meaning crisis is more of a purpose crisis, in that people don't even know like why their life should be on a certain directory. And that's even why like poor people, I don't think, have as much of a meaning crisis, because they have this idea that becoming more wealthy will be the answer, but because it's always in the future, it's a goal they work towards. So they're perpetually like feeling like they're making progress or something. But if they arrive at that point, like people that win the lottery, like those people have terrible lives because they've suddenly achieved the thing that they always thought would make their life meaningful, and surprise, surprise, it doesn't. So
right, because they're looking for meaning. They're trying to have meaning instead of trying to co-create meaning. And so when you misapprehend what meaning is and how to interact with it, you're going to run into that problem. And like I said, this is a framing problem. And that's part of the issue. And look, when John Vervaeke talks about this, he says they feel like their jobs are less meaningful. He doesn't say that they're BS jobs, right? He says they feel like their jobs are less, right? Because meaning is something that you co-create or co-manifest in the world. And that's the thing. Like the outcome doesn't matter to the person doing the work, because they're connecting it to something outside of themselves and not inside of the world.
But the job is a vehicle, and just connecting to what Michael was saying, arguably, right, up until like the Industrial Revolution, everyone was just surviving. And then like, work was just because I got to work. I mean, I'm thinking to myself, Mark, there's a farmer wakes up in the morning, right? Is his son going outside and just like chilling, looking at the stars, being like, I don't know if I'm ready to work now, Dad? Or is going to be like, well, we need to work because that's what we do.
But some of them are, right? And poor people become nihilistic and hit a meaning crisis too. you can argue that it's less of a problem for them. Yeah. And look, you can measure some of these effects, right, psychologically, but I got to tell you, those numbers aren't very impressive because it's not like everybody, right? It's a lot of people in a war do not get a heightened sense. I mean, those that do, and that's great. And they were in a meaning crisis before, and now they have nationalism, right, to help them orient or give them a frame in which to relate. And this is what it is. Like, there's a frame in which I can relate, right? And that's the thing that helps. And when you lose that frame, let's suppose you're postmodern and you just cut that frame out. When you lose that frame, now you can't relate. Now there's no way to co-create meaning anymore. So that's really what the problem is. And that, to me, is preceded by the intimacy crisis. Like, when we can't make deep connections with others and with nature and with ourselves, and possibly with God, if you want to use 4 frames instead of 3, then we have a problem. And the problem that we have, roughly speaking, is that because there's no stable space for us to transform within. We cannot become the kind of creature that we need to become. We get stuck at a certain point, and then we stop making progress forward. And this is why Jordan Peterson says things like, it's amazing how little encouragement people need. And I took that very seriously. So I started giving people a little bit of encouragement. I cannot tell you how much of a change that's made for a bunch of people. And they've told me, no, that was really helpful, like really, really helpful. And I've seen them turn around because of it.
How important is it then, and this relates to Michael when we're talking about having it as individuals or as a group, that, you know, Nechama mentions the point over here about, like, it's literally how we create sanity together, right? Like, you know, you're creating this meaning. So now it's clearly, when you're saying good jobs, then arguably doing a job alone is a lot more difficult.
Yeah, it can be for some people. Some people like working alone. Like, I actually don't like working with other people on average.
No,
like,
but then are you framing?
So it's not that easy. It's not a one-to-one answer. I mean, this is the materialist problem. Materialists look for certainty. They look for 100% answers, and it's relational. Like, it's all relational. Luke Thompson would say it's the personal, and I think he carries that a little too far. But he's right. It's about you to the things, and it's not thing. It's things, and this is where we mess up. We want this singular sort of discrete linear relationship. That the talk with John Vervaeke and DC Schindler and Ken Lowry was great, because they actually touched on some of this, although of course I have many objections to their overly complicated framing, but they touch on this, right? They touch on this discrete linear sort of trappedness, right? This propositional and procedural way of thinking that prevents proper meaning making.
Well, that's, to me, in a certain way, the Tower of Babel, where you have...
Yeah, it's the same story. Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah, sure. If you want to go all theological on me, which I can't. I just want to sprinkle a little bit. No, but you should. No, that was perfect. That was perfect. What you did was great, right? I can't play, but that was great. It is the Tower of Babel. You're right about that. And that's why I want to link it back to Vervaeke's language. So that was really good.
The term they use in Hebrew, it's Safachat Dvarim Achadim, one language, and the things were one, basically. And you can clearly see that, like you were saying, those linear lines are pulling that, you're going to lose your meaning. And arguably, the Tower of Babel itself isn't, I think the intention is not wrong. It's how it's oriented. And, like, arguably, you could say, like, even the meaning crisis, you are looking to build a coherent Tower of Babel. Maybe the name would be different. But you do want to orient and build a structure, quote unquote, together. However, you want to be doing that.
I don't think you want to build a structure. I think that's part of the problem, is people want to build a structure because they're materialists. And I don't want to build a structure together.
Well, 1 second. Didn't you guys say we need a structure?
No, we do. But I want to have many structures. See, this is where the argument comes in, right?
Sure, but then many structures could still be one large structure.
But I don't think they can, and I don't think they have to be. But this is actually where the argument came in, right? So you have a bunch of people who have a thing, right? And they deny they have a thing, but whatever. They clearly have a thing. You're not defending something you don't have. So they have a thing. And they're like, Jacob's like, well, I want to do this different thing. I want to create this different thing. I want to be explicit about the structure. I want to be explicit about the things that we need to do the thing that I want to do at scale, because scale changes everything. The thing that you can do with 10 people, you can't do with 1,000 people. Just That's the way the world is laid out, right? And so what ends up happening is, Jacob says, I want to do this differently. And everybody over here pretends like they're being attacked, when in fact, he's just saying, no, I want to go off on my own and do this. I'm not saying don't do what you're doing. I'm not trying to change you. I'm just want to do this way. And if you want to do this way with me, please come and join me, that's why I supported all of those streams, the ones that I caught, because I thought that was actually an important message. So, right. And this is, maybe this is a good way to fight that Neoplatonic tendency that we'll say Vervaeke has, is to point out, well, we have a story of what happens when you make everything into the one, John. It's called the Tower of Babel. And I didn't know that about Hebrew. So that was super helpful. Thank you for that, because that gives new tools in the toolbox for sure. Right. So if it really is combine everything into one, that is the sin, if you want to put it that way, of the Neoplatonic outline that people are using, whether they made that mistake or not.
But can't it be then that, let's say, then Michael has his mini tower and you have your mini tower and Jacob has his mini tower. So I'm with you, yeah. But aren't they orienting towards the same place?
Well, see, that's the key. The key is what are you oriented towards, right? Because you have to be oriented towards something. You can imagine there's three positions, right? There's position number one is oriented towards the bad or evil, right? I should use evil because that's more precise. That's on the vertical. Good and bad are on the horizontal. Good and evil are on the vertical, right? So you can be oriented towards evil. You can be oriented in the middle, neutrally, because most of the stuff we do is neutral. Like making dinner and all those things, not that they don't have an ethical component, but most of the components of those things are of neutral valence with respect to the vertical, with respect to good and evil, right? But in order to orient towards the good, you actually have to put a lot more effort into that. And if you put no effort at all, you're more likely to fall into the broad base of evil, right? And that's what happened to Sam Harris, right? He doesn't have a sense of good and evil. He just says, you need to move away from the worst possible evil and you'll do good, which is total obvious nonsense. And he proved it with TriggerPod, right? So no, that's not a way to understand the good. The good has to be a star in the sky to sort of bring in some Peterson, right? That you move towards, that you struggle towards. It has to be. And so in that way, how you do that and what structures you use may be unique to you or the group of people like you. And that's okay. And I would say that the want to build structure and work within a hierarchy is the least Protestant thing ever, right? Because Protestants, that's what they're objecting to. They're saying, we don't need anybody between us and God because we have the Bible and that's all we need. And so, right, they're like the party of anarchy or something, for sure. I mean, very obviously. And I don't say that as a slur. I mean, I think Jacob's conception is dead on. Like somebody's got to spread out into the new space and discover new territory. There you go. I mean, that's valid, necessary, required, and good, right? But it can also go too far. And that's when you object to other people's structures. It's like if somebody else wants to build something because they need it to work at scale, why not let them? Like, why are you interfering with them? Because then you're being tyrannical, not them. They haven't even started it yet. Like, how you can't be tyrannical before you have the thing to be tyrannical with? That makes no sense.
Casey, what do you think?
Well, since I'm Catholic, it's more obvious to me that you have to submit to a hierarchy, regardless of how be nice, questionable the hierarchy may be at some times, right? But that's always there. Like if you're in the synagogue, right, and the rabbi is talking about scripture, you don't just sit there and quietly listen and accept everything, right? People will stand up and shout their disagreements. And sometimes a lot of times it's needed. So you don't just randomly shout disagreements to your higher ups without having some sort of purpose in mind towards like, this needs to be fixed or this is misunderstood. And, but you still submit to the hierarchy and you're going to, no matter what. There is a hierarchy that will be submitted to by you. So.
Manuel, what are you thinking? Oh, did he bust out? He ran away?
No, I don't run.
calmly walking back confidently to share his thoughts with us.
So yeah, like I think one of the things that I struggled with, and I guess that's the Protestant vein in me. It's like I was willing to go to church and say, well, I'll submit, right? Which is effectively participate contingently. Is that a good framing? Anyway, but there's a surrender aspect as well, right? Because what does surrender mean? Is like you give the authority over to a higher authority. That's what surrender means. And now you're a subject of that authority. And if you want to submit, like that is a part of it, right? And that's scary, right? And obviously that cannot go infinite, right? Because if you if you surrender into infinity, then you're just a puppet, right? And so that is a hard balance, and it's really easy to say, well, I'm just gonna be safe, and I'm gonna go and walk on one side of that line, and I'll never get trapped, right? I'll never make that mistake. But when you do that, you lock yourself out of types of participation, right? Like one of them would be like marriage, right? Like you can't have a successful marriage if you don't conform to it, right? And the conformation is the marriage decides who I am. Like that's like you have surrendered yourself to the marriage, and it's like this is really rough for people, right? Because like it's even more rough than finding meaning in some sense, and I think it's the prerequisite for finding meaning, right? Because the surrendering gives you at least a standard to judge yourself and how you're doing, because now you are being valued by your participation in this higher thing.
Just to ask Manuel, when you say, it's a two-part question. One is when you're saying, I think this is before the meaning crisis, do you specifically talking about like submitting to marriage, or are you saying submitting to something? Because if it's submitting to marriage, that sort of relates to what Mark is saying about the intimacy crisis in a certain extent. And secondly, just about what you said about sort of submitting to that, and that what, you know, the marriage is going to conform you. My brother told me when I got married, he spoke at one of, I don't know, like one of the meals we were having, and he said, my wife's name is Jenny. And he said, there's no more Chezi and there's no more Jenny. Now there's Jenny Chezi. And it's a new entity that, you know, which sort of relates to what you're saying. That new entity is on top of both of us. And just to bring it back to let's say religious context, that's sort of us again, like taking two and trying to create one again. I mean, whether it's creating a child or creating a person, and whether it's also conforming to this unity or this new entity we built. So Manuel, please go ahead. If you were specifically talking about like conforming in general or conforming to a relationship.
Well, so if you're in a materialist frame, I think marriage is as close as you can get, right? Because there's a distinction between the one-on-one, right? We were talking about intimacy, right?
Yeah.
It's easier to develop intimacy in a marriage than develop intimacy in your workplace, right? But you are surrendered, right? Like you're like to your work. Like it's like, oh, I'm gonna get up at this time because like I'm expected to be here, and like I'm gonna like bust traffic laws which I ethically shouldn't bust in order to get at work in time, right? So and so one of the things that I realized when going to church, right, like there's a lot of these things in the Bible that relate to the hierarchical relationship, like honoring, reverence, all of that stuff, right? And cultivating a participatory understanding of that stuff, right? Like, 'cause, like how often are you in front of the king, right? Well, you're not. Like, but you need to know what to do when you're in front of the king, right? And in some sense, everybody's a mini king in some frame, right?
It's
So-
very deep what you just said right now. Go ahead, sorry.
So we need to cultivate the relationship to these things. Like we need to, in order to have a proper society. And if you look at how they do it in the Eastern societies, right, where they have the social dimension effectively fulfill the role of God, right? Like that's an honor culture, right? They have these things fixed socially way better than we have in the West with our stupid individualism, right? And like I was in church today, and there was this thing. It's like everybody's unique, right? Like they have their unique way of relating to God. They have their unique way of serving God, right? Like that's good, right? But that uniqueness needs to come together in God, right? And so if you're in a materialist frame, right, serving marriage as your life goal can get you far, but like you'll end up in a midlife crisis, right? Because your kids go out of your house or whatever, right? And now there's the structure that your meaning making relied upon that's falling apart, and now what do you do? Well, you'll travel, right? You'll keep yourself busy with busyness, and like yeah, maybe that works for you, but like it's gonna eat it.
Well, and I want to bring in, so chapter 10 of Beyond Order by Jordan Peterson actually covers this. It's something that we, that Manuel and I this is how we got to containers, right? So we had sort of discovered this. The easiest way to think about it is there's a container called the relationship or the marriage or whatever, right? And that is the place that you go to get intimate, like the intimacy, the relationship, the attachment, whatever you want to call it, has to have a space in which it exists. That space is not arbitrary, as postmodernism would have you believe, because that actually is what postmodernism is. It's all frames are arbitrary. It doesn't matter how you frame the book. All those frames are perfectly equally valid. That's a lie. It's wrong. It's just flat out incorrect. And also the flattening of the world causes us to think of it as, well, there's Hezi Jenny all of a sudden, or Jenny Hezi, right? Or whatever, right? But actually what there is there's this relationship, this container called the relationship, and this star at the top of that you're both pointing towards. And I like when, I don't know if Peugeot talks about it or somebody else, but they basically, they're saying, look, in orthodoxy, you're both moving closer to each other because you're both moving towards God. Right? And so it's a second order effect. In other words, you're not actually moving. You're not looking at the other person and taking a step towards them and they're taking a step towards you. You're both on a journey up to this higher ideal, right? Whether that could be the local container of just a relationship or the larger container of God. Yeah, they're the same thing.
This relates to Babel, though. This relates to, like Manuel has his channel, you have your channel. Mm-hmm. I guess I would say as long as you're orienting towards the same place, right? Like you said, we're not itching towards this, we're going up here. Right. But isn't that like, I guess the grand structure then?
No, I don't think it is. I don't think it is. I think there's
so what is that orientation towards?
Well, the fact that things have the same orientation and are going to the same place doesn't mean they're the same thing. It doesn't mean
they're not the same thing. That's fine.
Right.
This goes back to the Tower of Babel. We want multiplicity, but can you be united and have multiplicity? But
yes.
But doesn't, I guess I'm taking an example. I mean, this might be a bad example, but let's say Burning Man. If you're inside of it, you're seeing like mayhem. But if you zoom out, you see like this beautiful, like circle that they built sort of around. He's in the middle. They're all spread out. So I'm sorry?
That's true for everything, right? Your perspective determines how you view it.
Yeah. I guess I'm connecting back to you, sort of back to our conversation, which is in the Bridge of the Meaning, there's like this fear of structure, or like there has to be rules. Like we're saying, you got to build a body. Right now, you're not saying there has to be one body and this is the only body, right? You're saying
right, well, we're not saying they have to participate. Like they're pretending like sure. Jacob doing his thing somehow impacts them, and that's not true. It's an insane assertion.
Well,
right?
go to the Tower of Babel, right? I'm not asking you to build this hammer. I'm plastering. You don't have to plaster. You could go 4
Right.
floors up. They're working on plumbing. Don't even worry about the plaster. My
Right.
question is, though, does
No,
the
but
common goal matter?
no, but there's a distinction between working on the foundation and building up.
Okay, expand. I
Well,
mean,
so-
I
so-
understand that there's a difference, but go on with that
So-
analogy.
So if you're getting people together and say, well, we're here on the internet, right? And like I made a bunch of categories on the Discord server that I'm starting, and I'm still trying to work out what and how to do that stuff. But like I want to have cooperation, right? And I want to aim it at 3 things, right? So sense making, which is basically borrowing intelligence from other people, and then community, right? Which is having a way, something that binds you effectively, right? And being bounded in, and therefore you're constrained so that you're not lost, right? And then thirdly, it's wisdom, right? And then the wisdom is the thing that allows them. It's like the navigation of participation, right? It's like the ethical understanding of when to do A and B and that there's a C, right? And that you could be participating in C if you changed who you were, right? That's effectively the step that people don't see. And then, like, we can do all the things of getting people back into society. But, like, I don't think you need to do that, because at that point, they're capable of doing that by themselves.
So, and maybe I'm not understanding you correctly, but let's say I go inside, whatever the inside is, and I'm seeing these 3 items you just listed. I would say that sense making is sort of like is you need to get to wisdom, right? Like, it's sort of like it's a connected step. But is the idea someone comes in, he does some sense making, he realizes he's part of a community, he emerges with wisdom, and then the idea isn't necessarily like build structure, it's good, go back into society, and then
Right.
that continues out. And then the idea
Right.
would be like, not you're a community leader, you're just embodied good father, which means good husband, which means kids do well, which means, multiplied by that whole community, everyone loves, I don't know, Ohio, because everyone's embodied.
The
Well,
family gets bigger, but the house doesn't have to, because people can go off and build their own houses.
Right, and
And
I would
there's no
argue
Tower of Babel problem at all.
And I would argue that you have a responsibility to the thing that raised you, right? So if the internet is your parent, then maybe you should give back to that parent in some sense. And like, not everybody has to, right? But some people have to, because else it disappears, right? And I think that's the thing in AA, right? There's this commitment to the thing, and that's also what the church should be. Hopefully is that you make that commitment, right, so that you sow those fields for the next generation.
But this also stresses why I think I would say Jacob, but let's say you guys, it's by you guys I mean, let's say Mark and Manuel, since I've discussed this with you, why it's so important, for example, that some voices are heard more and some voices are heard less, because if I'm trying where I'm mining for sense making and wisdom, right? Like, I can't be, I want to see the signal in the noise. And if I'm promoting too much noise, and by noise, I don't mean that it's bad, it's just mean that's not the signal I'm listening to,
Right.
that is going to get in the way. And arguably, after 5-6 years, I don't know, of, let's say, noise / sense making, okay, we've managed to realize here's the pile of just noise, here's a pile where it's still, we got to filter it out. So hence it's so important. So I fully now, I think, understand why, or I better understand sort of your position.
Yeah, and I wanna say, right, like, there's a time and place for everything, right? So things that might be noise at one place might be valuable at another place.
Right.
And so the fact that someone's contribution gets rejected means that they're not at the right place. It doesn't mean that their contribution isn't valuable. Like, we need to realize that's
right. And I was having a discussion earlier today with Ahmed, who had a lovely conversation on Agapic Orientation, Manuel's channel with Manuel. And, you know, what we were talking about is he said, well, you know, in the West, you guys have lines. And lines are wonderful, and I really appreciate the lines. He's living in Germany now, by the way. So he's like, yeah, I really, you know, there's some real stuff. But in Lebanon, right, people don't get in line. Everybody kind of jostles for position around each other, and they sort of do this thing, this Middle Eastern sort of thing, right? And I said, well, yeah, I get it, but like lines don't form from nothing. Lines form from that process. And then I gave him an example. And I guess I'll just give it here because it's easy. So years ago, I was at a science fiction convention that I happen to know a lot of people at this particular and the interesting thing about the convention was there was an artist there named Roger Dean, who I'm rather fond of because he did some album covers and some artwork for video games and stuff that I really like. And we went and bought some prints. And the guy said, oh, Roger Dean's coming down in like an hour and a half to sign things. And we were like, what? Well, let's get that done. Now that we bought these beautiful prints, we can get them signed by the person who did the original artwork. This is wonderful. But it was a ways away. So he said, oh, he's going to sit at that table. So we're like, all right, well, whatever. And we sat for a while, and then we got bored and wandered 50 feet away to the place where you could eat food. And so we were, you know, hanging out there and having this conversation. We come back, and the line is formed, right? The line is formed. And we knew where he was going to sit, and they sort of had an idea, so they had lined up. We went to the front because we were there first of all. But also, when Roger got there, he needed stuff. And so we directed two of the kids who were milling about in the front by the table who weren't in line. And we said, you go get this and you go get that. Let's get this done. So we organized all of this stuff. And then we put the kids in front of us because we were the two managers, basically. We put the kids in front of us, and they got their stuff signed first. And my buddy got his stuff signed third, and I got my stuff signed fourth. And there was some grumbling in the line about they cut the line, which A, wasn't true, but they didn't know because they weren't there, right? And B, we did all the work to make sure that you guys could get your stuff signed. Like, come on, you know, have a little gratitude, right? And so there's a way in which lines, you know, lines are great, but they're the middle of the story. They happen after the civilization, like after you go through the Middle East phase, we'll call it in this case, right? Where things are sort of, you know, all broken up and broken apart and people jostle. But you need some way to determine hierarchy, to determine who and what's important. And the thing that emerges is leadership and authority. And not in all cases, and it's not a perfect system because emergence is a very chaotic, imperfect system. But that's where the emergence is handy, right? Is in creating the structure and letting people find their room in the structure, right? And then when structures get so big, people have to be assigned because once a structure is full or gets full, your options go down, and then somebody needs to make a decision, right? And that's why you need a leader to make it, and the decision may be arbitrary, but it has to be made. So the fact that it's arbitrary is not relevant to the fact that a decision has to happen. And lines and formation are the same way. There's always a component of gathering up. So when I was at Thunder Bay, for example, you know, I was in a room with my buddy Ethan, who I drove to Thunder Bay. Right? I took him from Minneapolis airport, and he was like, well, I think I want to ask a question. And I'm like, well, you better get in line quick because the line is going to form. And before the line forms, we're literally all milling about the room, actually. Like we're actually just all standing up, milling about the room. And then how the line is going to be determined and where it starts is given to us. And then people do the Middle Eastern thing and they jockey for position in the forming line, right? And so that's that's how it works. It's not like lines emerge and the world doesn't start there. The world always starts with this chaotic formation.
Michael, what do you think?
Well, let's see. That was a lot of stuff. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think, yeah, there is a need for all that stuff, and it's okay that it's arbitrary sometimes. So just like, you know, that's why I keep saying the thing about like a tent. Like if you're going to build a city, first you got to build a tent because you got to do something to keep the rain off your head before you do the other thing. So, but I think it's just that's what we got to do. Build a tent, and then when we're in the tent, we can figure out the bigger plan or the next step or whatever.
I agree.
So Mark, what does
I'm gonna go. So I'll talk to you guys
see you,
later.
Mike. Lovely to see you.
Bye, Michael. And this also, like, if you guys could expand on, let's say you have your navigating patterns, you have your channel, right?
Mhm.
But let's say, so Michael's saying, I'm building a little tent, or I'm or I'm planting my flag, right? I'm doing my school. What is your move? How do you see this materializing with regard? And I'm sorry, I'm using the term materialize.
Yeah. No, that's fine. No, it's important. Like material is important. We can't.
No,
do
I
without
understand.
it.
Of course. I'm just talking to you. But how are you materializing what you're discussing?
Right. No, it's a perfect phrase in this particular case. It's like the materialist frame. It's perfect, right? And I told this to Michael. I said, well, I don't know what you need or what you have, but you let me know if there's something you think I can contribute, because I just learned about his idea, right? And so I'm like, all right, well, I don't even know where you are yet. Like, where is your flag planted, right? How much land do you have? How much ability do you have? How much time do you have? Like, is this the right time for you to implement this? Like, if you have a baby on the way, maybe you're not going to start to school for another 3 years just due to time constraints, right? Because it's not the time constraints in a marriage aren't yours alone. They're also your spouse's, right? Because if your spouse is pregnant, you're all your priorities get bumped automatically. Like, it's not, or if your spouse is in distress, right? Or if there's a dozen different ways in which that affects you directly. So I don't know if he's ready. When he's ready, I have some ideas. Like, I've started 8 businesses. I have experience in a variety of things, and maybe none of that is relevant or helpful to him. But I'm available. Like,
so I'm asking you as Mark, like, I'm sitting down. I wrote, like, we actually touched on a lot of topics I wrote down to discuss, right? So I look at myself and be like, okay, right now, my kids are down. I did my work. I'm gonna stream now for 2 hours. Like, this is like a mini version of participation, right? Now I'm gonna say, I want to have a conversation which isn't like, hey, PDK, YouTube Protestant, right? I want to come and say, like, how do I move forward, right? So we speak a little more about Michael and I guess I'm trying to say, like, okay, so I more understand Manuel, and I more understand is like, okay, like, I want to give people the sense making, I want to get people this wisdom, and then I want to, set them free, do your thing. Like, now you did it, right? So, Manuel, like, what is that? How does that look like to you? Like, and I guess, like, what do you need? Like, be like, here's $1 million. Like, what are you doing with that now?
Well, okay, so first of all, like, I don't care about the $1 million. I care about
$10 million.
No. I care about the people that I work with, right? So I want to first see, okay, like, who do we have and what can they do, right? And then, like, I have 2 questions, right? Like, how can I facilitate the individual, and how can I integrate the activity of the individuals? That's the 2 questions I have.
Yeah, because there's constraints in your available resources. And so the first step is, as I indicated with Michael, what are your current available resources? And what resources do you need for your aim? Right? Because that's really the question. And then if you're building, we'll say, a wisdom community, right? Which is my focus. We want to build wisdom communities. We don't want to make every...
Doesn't it, huh? Isn't what this looks like? Like, it doesn't start with you being like, I have a wisdom channel, and then everyone gets up and suddenly says what?
No. See, this is all too propositional. So wisdom is all about participation. Like, and I think explicitly.
That I understand. I guess my point is, like, doesn't need to start from propositional though?
No. Look, everyone gets this backwards, okay? Believe it or not, as hard as this may be to imagine, there was a time when bipedal human-like creatures that would become us with roughly our same brain power had no language. And yet, they still managed to form things like meaning, right? Why? Because participatory knowledge is way more important, way more significant, way more base than propositional.
even participatory knowledge, which I'm with you, which is deeper, and this sort of relates in a certain like extents back to like, you know, the child's version of like, you know, sort of participating in it. However, and it's true that it's sort of instinctual. You would say in this day and age, don't you still need to create like a forum for that so people know that they're invited?
You need that, but you don't need to create that propositionally. And I'm not saying you shouldn't be propositional about it. I'm not saying any of that. I'm saying that the emphasis of relying on the propositions is a mistake, and it's a bad mistake. Like the primary thing is participation. It's what you do. So in other words, if you talk about meditation and you let's say you make a meditation app because you're Sam Harris, and your meditation app is of one type of meditation, so you're not giving everybody the full flavor of meditation, et cetera, right? Or you do a meditation series on YouTube, right? And you just publish those recorded videos. That's not the same as doing 2.5+ years of meditation with John Vervaeke, even though he wasn't there for the whole time, right? There was a YouTube live stream, and that went for so long, and then that ended, but we had already transitioned to doing it daily on the Discord. And so
is that not just doing? Is that just like not walk, like, you know, just don't talk the talk, walk the walk? At the end of the day, you're saying like, okay, you need to sit down.
No. Like you need to know what walk, how to walk it, and where to go. Like,
right.
I'm with you. I'm just saying back to the propositional. Like, so I feel like in this form, there's a lot of talk the talk.
Right.
No,
Which is frustrating to me. Yes.
Right. That's the objection that Jacob has. That's the objection that we have. BOM is great. BOM should continue to do what BOM does. BOM should change nothing. Nobody's telling BOM what to do, right? More disclaimer.
I'm just writing this down. Mark wants to destroy BOM. Okay, fine.
Yeah, you might as well, because that's the way they're treating everything, right?
But you hear the frustration
for what we're doing, right? Because what we're doing is more specific to the engagement. Right? Because that's important, that every day at a certain time, people are meditating together. That's actually important. And whether they're actually meditating or praying, it doesn't matter to us. Some people come in and pray. Some people meditate. Some people use their own meditation. I don't care. Some people just sit silently and wait for us. Whatever. I don't care. But we're all together in that space at that time, even though it's a virtual space. Suboptimal, but better than nothing.
Which arguably, and Manuel, I would like to know what you think about this. There's a conversation, like you could say, okay, if you're spending another 2 hours, and like you just said, I don't care if you're Zen sitting, if you're doing Kundalini yoga, if you're just thinking, okay, but you're participating, which you would categorize as different than participating in a conversation about participating.
Right. So what I wanted to say is, especially the people that end up here, right? Most of them have trauma, right? Like they have engaged in a school system, and they've been let down effectively, right? And they've made up their mind, right? And like a lot of them are really propositional, these stuff, right? Like so there's all of these ways, these behaviorisms that have snuck in, right? Like they're not inherent in being human. They're cultivated by not being attentive to what you're cultivating effectively, right? And having no way of judging what you're doing as well, right? So what you first need to do is you, and this is why meditation is a good tool if you can manage to do it, is you need to start getting the awareness of like, oh, I'm doing this, right? Like I'm self-sabotaging in this way. When I'm in a conversation and I start my rant and I don't know the purpose of the rant in relation to the conversation, I'm making a mistake, right? Like people get that insight after over 2 years of meditation, right? So it takes them so long to realize that. And so recognizing that is a thing, right? Like that, and people are so far away from that insight that means that there's a bunch of work to do. And just talking to people and saying nice things about everything is one or something, right? Or just believing God isn't sufficient. Like it's not, right? Like it might be helpful in some conditions, but in other conditions, that's not what these people need, right? And then it's like, yeah, not everybody can meditate, right? So you can do yoga or whatever, right? And prayer, right? And there's not one type of prayer. So I would find it amazing if we have multiple prayer groups, right? But I also want the prayer groups to be intentional about the way that people participate in prayer, because like what happens when you go into church, right? You go into church and people say, well, you say this, right? Like, this is the prayer, and you try real hard, effectively, right? And if you're lucky, they say a little bit more, right? But it's not easy to understand, and you need handles to see, to open up, right? Like you need to get the eyes to see, right? And I guess that's the thing that I and Mark have been trying to figure out. Like, how do you get the eyes to see, right? And that's a prerequisite for the wisdom cultivation, right? And I don't think you can separate these two, right?
Well, don't you need to have? I hear what you're saying. I would say, arguably, whether it's via meditation or. Is there not something about this channel, and you could be like, yes, there was, but like it's been 6 years, where we want to make sure people feel comfortable to have that realization and not feel, let's say, crippled by that. Like, you would want someone to be able to, let's say, then 2 years into this conversation, be ranting, and then I'll catch myself and say, I don't know where I was going with this. I'm really sorry if I derailed. Now, I'm only going to say that if I've experienced here in the past me going on a rant and you saying, that's okay, I hear where you're coming from, thanks for sharing. Now, like, it's sort of, does that make sense? That you would have to be a space where like one is allowed to sort of get lost. Now you could be like, okay, you've been getting lost for 6 years, everyone had a good time, now let's start like tightening up.
So yes, you're allowed to get lost, but people have to realize this is also a scaling problem, right? It's like, get lost in a one-on-one conversation, please. Like, don't get lost in a group conversation, because now you're not only wasting one person's time, right? You're wasting multiple people's time, right? And we like, there's scarce resources in like all these other people. They have a motivation of being in that conversation, right? And that's being frustrated by what you're doing, right? And at a certain point, that's intolerable. And so
well, arguably, they would say, like, they want to do something, right? Now, you could be like, okay, there's the ones that want to do something that, like, first have to get to the level of they have to realize it needs to be embodied. You have to submit to something. That's level one. Someone comes and says, okay, Manuel, I want to submit. I want to be part of it. I want to embody. Like, where do I go? What do I do?
Well, I talk to people one-on-one all the time. Like,
okay. So you could say, then great. Then come to my channel, come to Mark's channel, go to Jacob's channel.
Well, we're still working on this, Kezi. Like,
of course.
This is what we're. But yeah, you need a place for them to go. And so what happened last night on BOM is a couple of people showed up who had never engaged before. They said, we saw the live stream conversations here, and we really wanted to talk to you guys. Like, oh, okay, that's great. Let's talk, right? But they, also there's, to Vanderklay's excellent point, Pastor Paul is right. Like, a lot of people can't do discourse. So relying on that is not good, right? And then you look at, we'll say, success as such, the symbolic world, the stuff that Jonathan Pageau is doing is the most successful in the space, right? It just is. And then, if you talk to somebody like Joey, he notes something like, well, the Discord server is not serving John Vervaeke as well as it's serving Paul Vanderklay. And there are many reasons for that. So to some extent, we've done part of this work, and our efforts were thwarted, again, through a bunch of different things, right? There were bad agents, looking to knock us down. There was lots of noise in the signal, and that caused a bunch of people to leave, right? There was a lack of leadership, right? There was very little authority. The authority that we did have was not supporting of the community and the positions, right? Okay, and so that caused a problem. So now we're like, all right, well, we're done with this. And if Paul doesn't want to do that, and he doesn't, he said that explicitly, right? That's fine. We're going to do it anyway without his help.
I think you're and maybe Paul understands this and like I just didn't, but like I think you're saying it even clearer now than you did in the past, which is okay, because we are now ready, and by we I mean you guys, we are ready to like we said, like Manuel says, like I want to sense make and ultimately I want to get to this wisdom. Okay. Now I need, so to speak, Paul is part of the structure to come and say, okay, so you need to help people orient themselves naturally towards like Manuel saying, I don't want someone like disturbing the conversation, not because we're mean, because all of us together want to get to this wisdom stage. Now, if Paul would, let's say, come out and say, hey, there's going to be this conversation, it's going to be a very good one. And the attitude would be, okay, the conversation is between, let's say, 3 people. And people will realize, okay, this is a conversation that Paul highlighted. So that means I'm not going to barge in the middle and start going on a rant. I'm going to let this conversation happen, which ideally
Paul will do all that. Paul will do all that, right? Paul will do that. Look, we've got contacts. We can get all the attention that we need, right? When we're ready. We're not ready. I think Jacob rushes things. I love Jacob. I support his idea, but he's rushing things and he's trying to build something bigger than he needs to initially.
But you mean by this now?
Well, I don't see. Yeah, his idea of a 24/7 channel is a little overreach, in my opinion, right? And the problem again is scale. People don't understand scale, right? So a 24/7 channel versus the 10 that Michael talked about, right? It's a big leap. And I think you can build the 10s, and that's actually what we're doing. So I'm not, I'm not trying to say change anything to Jacob either, right? Keep your dream, but maybe scale it down to 10s instead of quite so high skyscrapers, right? And so that's those steps, those stages that Michael very eloquently talks about with the 10s, right? That's what I want to inject. Yeah, you need to start with the 10s, and then we're starting with website. And all of that, right? Which I'm working on now unsuccessfully, but we'll get there. All right. And then once we have that, we'll be able to do what Symbolic World did, which is have a Facebook group and have an Instagram account and have a Twitter, right? And loop all that in so that we get more participation.
So you do that and you have participation. The people are there, right? And I would ask you and Manuel then. So the floodgates are open, people are coming, and they're like, all right, like what's happening here? So like, right. I guess my point to you, like, doesn't have to be, let's say, pointed sense making or, wisdom cultivation topics, which it wouldn't be like, it's less about, what is the Trinity, or more it would be like, how do I take that concept and embody it like in my day to day? So like, how do you, right. Why would it not be, let's say, even on a channel like this? And I guess what I was sort of trying to do for myself by like writing out these topics, wouldn't it not be get on the Just Chatting and write as like the subcategory, these 3 loose items? But at least then I'm not talking ice cream. I'm talking about.
No, I mean, yeah. No, look, I have admin access for a reason now, right? And so I've been invited to do some of these Just Chatting streams. And I have a plan for that, which is based around a set of practices and an observation that somebody I met on Clubhouse made. So he was trying to start the project that basically a contentious debate club where we deliberately debate, contentiously and then still get along to model the fact that you can do that, right? That is a thing that you can do, right? That you can in fact go in and have a raucous argument with something, a raucous disagreement, because Manuel and I do this like almost every day with someone disagreeing about something, and then everything's fine. Like it's like, what did you make for food, right? Like because it's fine. Like the fact that we disagree, I know it looks lovely. The fact that we disagree in the moment doesn't have to destroy the longer term relationship that we've built up over, like almost 3 years now, right? It doesn't have to. There's no reason for that to occur. And that's one thing. So I think that's probably what I'm going to start the Just Chatting with. And I have a plan around this, believe me, right? That's part of what I want to do. I want to come on here and say, all right, let's argue, right? Let's have a good disagreement, right? And just to model what is a good disagreement, where we're at the end, we're still friends. Like we're still like our relationship isn't marred by the fact that we just yelled and screamed and hurled ad hominem attacks. Like I have no problem with ad hominem attacks, right? I think they're fine.
So the thing I wanted to add is I said this like 2 weeks ago to Paul in the live stream, because he was in here and then he hopped out to his own stream, and I said to him, what you need to do, Paul, is you need to figure out the relevant ways to talk about it, right? Like that's like so what are the relevant aspects that we need to engage with in this corner, right? Like that, because if and that's kind of what identifying what the container is that we're in. And it's like because when I listen to Paul, he jumps into this political frame and then he goes into the social status frame, and I'm like, yeah, right, like those frames have a bunch of intelligibility if you apply them on the world, but they're not useful, right? Like the when we're talking, right? Like I don't need to trust you in order to talk to you. I just need you to behave in a way that I can communicate. Like that's all I need from you. And all this trust stuff is this extra layer because we can't live in fate, right? If I live in fate and I commune with the being that is good, right? Like then I have nothing to fear from. And I don't need to have a trust relationship with you because I'm grounded and I know what I want. I know what is important. I know how to present what's important, right? Like all of these things, and all of this trust stuff is anxiety, right? Like why do you need to trust someone? Because you're fucking scared. You're a child that's clinging on to the skirt of its mom and doesn't dare to play in the room. Like that's what it is. And it's like, yes, there's a lot of people like that, right? But we can't say that's the right thing, right? What you have to say is grow up. Look at the people who know how to do it and play their game, because you can play that game. And if you learn to play that game, life will become a lot easier. And we need to start bringing that message out to a lot more people. Like there's different games that you can play, right? There's different ways of participating, and we need to model those. We need to like keep pointing at those. Like one of the things I got frustrated with the meditation talks in the early times is like, yes, there is a reason to cling to your mom's skirt, right? Like that is like that's a valid perspective. Like the world is scary, but we can't point at that perspective and lift it up, right? Like we can't attempt to do that perspective. We can't keep pointing back down the mountain, because then we'll slide down. Like that's what happens if you attend to the world in the wrong way. And that's not how you cultivate wisdom. You cultivate wisdom by like leaving your mom's skirt and falling on your face and crying and coming back and then finding the courage to go out again.
I would say, Manuel, and maybe you're saying this is not specifically connected, but I would assume that for some people religiously, the last 6 years has been very rocky for them from a religious perspective, where they do feel like, they've left, some conversations that Jacob has with other people on the site, I could assume them feeling like, the things he's saying right now are terrifying. Like to me, they are. Now you could be like, well, grow up, dude. Well, he's like, well, if he's right, I don't know. What did I go to church for? For 30 years for so these are, and I get it. There's at different levels. Now I know in a certain sense, Paul is saying you don't have to have those, let's say, groundbreaking conversations all the time. But I guess for some people coming in over here, before they could sense make, and again, this relates to the conversation we're having in the beginning, Mark, about religious people specifically, before they could sense make, they first need to reorient all their toolkit to be okay, if I'm, so, and you could be okay, well, we had 6 years of that. Jonathan Pageau,
No. Like they need their own space. Like that's a justified way of going about a thing, and they need to be facilitated in that path. But that also means that they need like you don't let your kid drive a car, right? Like there's a process to which you get to in order to drive a car. So look, don't let people who are not ready do the thing that they're not ready for. Like that's unearned wisdom. It's like, oh, I read a book about how to do that, and now I want to participate. It's like no, just no.
Yeah,
I
and
guess
that's
really that's the rub. That's because
well, that's the complaint, Kevin. That's the complaint. The complaint is you can't go up to somebody and start talking Christianese to them anymore. There was a time when you could do that. That time is long past because there's too many people who have either rejected the concepts, not just the words. The words are one thing. They've rejected the concept, like the concept of creation doesn't exist in Sam Harris's mind. And I will say this, Sam Harris does the best job of accounting for creation because he uses this predetermination argument. That's how he accounts for creation. That's his way around the problem of creation, is to say, no, there's all this predestination in the world, and we really don't make our own. I mean, I know it doesn't make any sense. We don't have any free will. It's like, well, of course you do. Like, you couldn't think about free will if you didn't have it. That's not how the world works, right? But if you're not ready with creation, with that concept, then spitting out a bunch of words about God is creator and God's the being who's not a being, and whatever other crazy religious terms you crazy people use, is not. You're too far away. They don't even have the concept. They can't attach the word to the concept, and we're that far away. But we keep privileging, propositions, and it's like, well, you're privileging propositions, but reality, in some sense, is not objective in the sense they mean. Reality is objective in the sense that reality is the thing that objects to your subjective experience. So if in your head you say, oh, you know what, I can fly, and then you try to fly, you find out real quick about how gravity works.
It never works for me.
That's an objection. That's the world objecting to your subjective experience in your head.
Yes, but there's something about, I'm bringing up this conversation again that Bernardo had with Jonathan Peugeot. I don't know if you saw it. And he talks about the fall, and he gives an example how, the fall is humanity evolved to a place where it leaves instinct and has metacognition. Now,
right.
I'm not running necessarily to come and say, I'm giving this example, someone that would be scared. I'm in a place where, listening to that only emboldens my resolve and my relationship with God. Okay. Now,
right.
But you could understand, Manuel, how now, and you could be like, well, great. Then don't be in the wisdom part of the conversation now. But for someone that could be like ground shattering.
Well, yeah, right. So for some people who are one step away, that next step is important, right? But then there's a bunch of other people who it's not important for. So one of the projects we tried to do on Awakening from the Meaning Crisis was we started this meeting community server. And the purpose of that server was to put a set of people on there on a regular basis. So there would, roughly speaking, try to be somebody on there at all times who would gently lead people into on-ramp, lead people into the conversation, lead people into the help that they needed, and then pair them up with somebody on a similar journey that was, we'll say, ahead of them in some sense. I know it's sloppy Cartesian language, but I don't have better terms, right? And then that would enable them to have a partner to walk through their transformation with them, roughly speaking.
But do you feel that's just been looping?
Well, no. We could never get it off the ground because, again, we lack leadership. The authorities that we did have access to refused to step up, so they didn't want to be authorities or leaders, and that killed it. Because you need, this is what I keep saying. I know you think it's optional and that, it's not present, but everywhere there is, these things are happening. Leadership, authority, structure, rules, and an aim are present everywhere. You are not looking in the world and seeing those things, and they're purely emergent.
I get that,
but emerged, but they're not remaining emergent.
You're writing this down right now, but I guess I'm saying, what are rules for, ascertaining wisdom?
Well, you can't do it through rules. You have to Manuel's point and to the point of play. The only way to
Structures of
obtain
values.
wisdom,
That's what it is.
right? The
No,
only
but
way to
Art, you're
obtain
saying
wisdom,
like there needs to be a leadership, there needs to be rules. So I guess I'm saying
no. Wisdom is a second order effect from participating in the world in a way that you can frame, right? When you're a postmodern, you remove the framing. All the participation is never going to lead to wisdom except by accident.
I understand that. So I'm saying with the frame, I guess I'm asking that.
The real question, Kazi, is how do you bring people from a place of arbitrary frames or bad frames into a frame that can hold them for their transformation? And that may be more than one frame because they may.
No, but that's almost that concept. I understand. I guess I would say, what is the vessel you have that contains that, and like what rules and leadership does it have to allow you to do that?
Well, so okay, so there's a couple things there, right? So first of all, you need to provide a community, right? So there's, and this is what I'm trying to get off the ground is like, and that's what's literally also what we wanted to do with this meaning community Discord is like, and this is why I was having my eye on Bridges of Meaning, because like I think Bridges of Meaning was in some sense doing this, right? Like there needs to be this ever-present thing, right, where you can, when you need help, you can show up and you can ask for help, right? And then there's people there that actually understand what the heck is going on and can assist you, because like else it's not that useful, right? But so that's one thing, right? And then the categories that I have on the server is hosting new people, right? So that's concept. And then there's practices, right? So the practices are the meditation, the prayer, right? And you can have communal practices as well, right? Like they're more complex, but they need to be facilitated by people, right? Like I can facilitate a couple practices, but I cannot facilitate all practice, right? And you have Christian practices and right? Like, so there's this whole bunch of things, right? So like I want to get that coordinated, like a book club is in some sense of practice, right? And then I have like courses, right? So courses is effectively Awakening from the Meaning Crisis is a course, right? But it's bad because like it's so difficult that you can't expect people to do that, right? So if you have this interactive experience by someone actually walking you through it with the interactive stuff, like that's way better. And John Vervaeke's meditation live stream was kind of like that, right? So we need things like that, right? It's like, okay, well, Mark and Manuel are always talking about this objective material reality. Well, like, how do we find a way to make people realize the implications of objective material reality? Right. So that would involve some exercises, right? That would involve some discussion. That would involve some teaching, right? Like, and that could be like a course, right? And like I maybe develop a course and then someone else takes it over because I want to keep developing courses. Like I don't want to get stuck in.
And in that space, in that course space, right? I love that, right? There's a course space and there's different versions you could do that. In that course space, ideally, there needs to be a hierarchy and there needs to be rules. And there needs to be like, yeah, you're not like we started at 5 and we're not going back and saying this right now because this is what we're doing right now. Now, and maybe I'm wrong about this. In the Bridge of the Meaning, and I, to be honest, like I don't go on all these channels, but I see like, the marriage crisis or the memes or like, aren't there already subgroups? And you can be like, yes, they are, but they're not functional. They don't.
Yeah, they get hijacked by people who want to complain about something.
Which goes back to the people that quote unquote Joey used to remove, which created his own drama.
Right.
Okay, I'm sorry that I'm doing rehashing.
No, but that's exactly the problem, is that there is no perfect leadership, and leadership does not solve a problem so much as it creates other problems. The question is, what trade-offs are you willing to have? And it's correct to look at things like structure and hierarchy and leadership as things that impose or things that are purely tyrannical or any of that. Having a structure for something allows people to participate in a maximally efficient way. Is it an optimally efficient way? No, but it is a maximally efficient way.
Understood. I guess I would say that, like,
Well, that's important.
no, for sure. But in this, and again, maybe I'm wrong, but like, and where related to Paul was, if Paul, as quote unquote being Paul, if you don't, I don't want to use the word elect, but if you don't identify or create some sort of hierarchy value, then the unruly mob is never going to allow someone.
No, that's not what happened. That's what they think happened. They think Paul didn't appoint anybody, and so we don't have anybody. But when you have a leader like Joey and he leaves, you have a vacuum, and that vacuum gets filled. Now, that vacuum can get filled one of two ways, right? One way is explicitly. This is now the person who's taking, or the people who are taking over the role that Joey had before. Do it explicitly, or it will happen and nobody will know. And that's what happened. Okay, this is history now. That happened,
And we rather not have the shadow behind the scenes.
Right. Exactly. Well, I mean, I'd rather not. Like, again, and I don't care. They can do whatever they want, right? I'm not unhappy with what they're doing.
Mark loves everyone.
Right. Right. It doesn't matter. Right. But what Manuel and I are doing are saying, look, we've been trying for 2.5 years, a little bit longer, to get a bunch of things rolling. We have a bunch of really good ideas that we know work. This is stuff that I've implemented in the past in other online environments, for example. Like, so I know they work because some of them lasted a very, very, very long time. Some of them just morphed, which is what.
Well, can't they be? And you're gonna be like, yeah, Chazi, this is what I do all the time. But like, I'm saying for myself, I would look at that being then like, okay, then like in 2 days, I'll talk to Manuel, and then let's talk about one of those topics, and then let's just do an hour and a half about that topic.
Yeah, well, look, there's lots of ways to manifest these sorts of things, and look, this is where the emergence comes in. Everybody wants an answer now as to what the structure and leadership and rules should look like. And what I'm saying is,
no leadership. I'm just saying
where the emergence happens. So
how do you move out of this?
Well, we're working on that. I think.
Well, I built the server, right? So I set it up, right, and I'm in the setting it up. I bounce into things, and then Chad, although I didn't engage with it yet, but Chad has this amazing ideas and this participation of him, right? So, like, I want to give that a full walkthrough, right? And like I was thinking of doing a live stream here where we just discuss these things, right? Like, okay, like I have these ideas about the server, right? But like they like I made the server partially out of frustration because I'm like, things need to happen, right? And one of the things that we took 2.5 years is because we don't want to do the wrong thing, right? So one of the things that happens is if you're at a space and you're keeping that space and you're moving from that space, you destroy the space, right? So like we had this allegiance to the community on the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis server, right? And that counted really high. And then if you move, you want to move to something that works, else you're just destroying things, right? And that's just horrible.
Well, and look, you need a website for people who can only engage with the website. You need a Facebook group. Like, you need, if you're going to do an online community, that's what you need. And then later on, despite what people say, right, you need a building, right? You need a space. You need those things. And whether you get them from somewhere else, there's already spaces, we can use that, because that's what AA does, right? It doesn't not have a space. It just uses other people's space and takes it over for a while. So it's not that the space doesn't exist, it's that they're parasitic on top of existing space, which is fine. Like, that's fine. But to say that you don't have a space when you're meeting somewhere is not quite accurate, right? And that's what you need. You need to be able to build those things up. And I like and support the idea of estuary. It's not my favorite idea. It's not how I would have done it for sure, right? I see some dangers there for sure. There's been some good criticisms of it, right? But you need something like that. You need the ways to manifest those things. And BOM had an effort going on to build physical spaces, using online tools. And, there were good reasons why those efforts didn't go well, right? So it's not like these things haven't even been tried or anything, right? And this is why we're taking our time, because look, Manuel and I always had this rule, and other people on the AftMC server. If we're having a discussion on something really, really important and trying to work something out, and somebody comes into the space and needs help, we drop what we're doing and we help that person. And this goes back to what Manuel was saying. There's a community that we built there. We built that, and now we have some responsibility for that community. And disengaging from it can't be done all at once. And, we do extra things, like we were doing a clubhouse room every Monday for a while, right? We do other things. We're engaging here, right? We're trying to reach out and find like-minded people who are ready, willing, and able to submit to the idea, not a specific structure, but submit to the idea of structure leadership, right? Rules, a common aim, right? A container that we can all cooperate with, right? There's leadership and authority. Like, and if you think that's a good way to scale things, because I'd say that's the only way to have anything, then, we want your input and your help, whether it's through Discord or email or eventually the website when it gets up and running. And I'll announce that as soon as I get the damn thing working, right? It doesn't really matter, but we are working on these things. And we have 300 pages in one notes file alone of notes about not just Vervaeke's work or stuff we're working on here, but tons of things. Manuel's got separate documents on practices, separate documents on games and gaming. We worked with Skylar to help him develop an intake form for his homework thing, right? We worked with this game designer, Rob, helping him design his cool game that's supposed to be therapeutic in some sense. I mean, that's degrading the game to some extent. So we're working on all this stuff.
Casey, hearing this, I know you said, there's the hierarchy of God and we're all under it. So granted, okay, put that aside. What do you make of hearing this when saying, are you as an individual, are you ready to submit to rules, to hierarchy? Forget, there's not something specific, but what do you hear when you hear that?
That's what people have been craving for. That's what people wanted. Why do you think Jordan Peterson was so incredibly popular? This is what he's saying, that he has to, these things will be there whether you like them or not, and you submit to the good ones or you're taken over by the bad ones, right? And all this makes me think of a conversation. Yes, go ahead.
How do you then identify, and you guys could all take this, so what do you think is in the root of the concern that the people here have a concern about? They're resistant because arguably they know what Jordan Peterson was talking about. They're really into it around it as well. What do you think their resistance is? Because arguably you could say that in conversations that you have with them, Mark, I would say they might even be persuaded to agree with you, yet you could find them 2 weeks later being no, don't break down. So what do you think it is? Casey's sitting over here nodding his head saying yep, this sounds good.
So there's an Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord YouTube channel. And we had our amazing friend Nick, who is coming on my channel and doing a dialogus with Skylar and me. He had this course, literally, right? That was one of the first courses, I guess, around cults. So he's been on Paul's channel, right? And he's been in 4 cults. So he's going over what is a cult, how do you recognize it? What are the characteristics? Why is it not? Why is it, right? So he has this whole idea, right? And if you should watch it because he's a smart guy. He's really smart, and that was some good stuff. And so I think that's what people are afraid of, right? Vervaeke says, I don't want to lead. Paul says, I don't want to lead. Peugeot says, I don't want to lead. Peterson says, I don't want to lead. Why are they all saying that? Because they realize that if you lead, you take on responsibility, right? Now you're the head of a body. And if the body is not surrendered, then it's going to do things and you're going to feel responsible. And people are going to hold you responsible. That's one of the things that are, I also talk about it in my dialogues actually about this problem. But but that's what's happening in society, right? Like people are like, oh, you made this tweet, and then somebody got killed by someone, and now you're responsible for that. I was like, no, right? And that sucks, right? But like we were saying, right, like people are going to do that with Peterson whether he's leading or not, right? Like people are going to point at him in that way, and if you're not leading, right, you're putting the spirit into the world, right? And you're just like, oh, this spirit is just gonna do whatever, right? It's like, but are you sure that spirit is gonna manifest as good, or in another way, like even if that spirit is gonna manifest as good, do you think the spirit would manifest better if you took care of it, you cultivated it? Right, and again, right, like we need to use the right language, right? Like leadership is not a tyrannical thing. It's like the coaxing of what is into a shape, right, and then pointing that shape into something where it can manifest for the good. And like that's well. So first of all, when we were talking about these people being too far away from a place, right? So. And then you have this conversation that Peugeot is having with Vervaeke about these higher beings like a city and everybody's super confused, right? Because like how to deal with it, how to understand it, right? So what if someone took control of one of those beings and made it manifest things in the world, right? How scary is that? Like there's this person that can do magic, literally, right? And you don't know what's happening because you can't see it. So you have to, well, now we can go to trust, right? Like now you have to trust that person. It's like, yes, right. You have to trust that person.
Right. Well, and that's the deep historical confusion we have. So a lot of people go in and they say, well, you know, look what happened just before World War II. Yeah, what happened just before World War II? There was a structure already there and somebody evil took it over. Not somebody evil built a structure and did evil. The structure was already there and they got it, right? The centralization it already had. This is my argument against all socialism. Like socialism is great, except if you centralize power, eventually, although it doesn't seem to take even a generation, eventually somebody evil will take it over and now they've got centralized power. That's why you don't want to centralize power. It's not that hard. You also don't want
that happening here.
Well, no. But that's again, we're talking about what people are afraid of, right? Because Manuel asked the key question, and I would also say, and I want to add one thing to it because you said something earlier, Kezi, that was interesting to me. You said, "Oh, well, people saw what Peterson did." Well, people saw different things, and some people missed a lot of what Peterson did, right? So, and I have a video on this on navigating patterns, of course. Right, called what did Peterson do? Right, one of the things he did that people don't understand is, despite being a top published scientist, like actually in the top 10% of cited scientists in his field, he did not come out and say, "Look, I'm a top published scientist in my field. So when I talk about psychology, you can trust me." He didn't say that. Well, what? He didn't say that. He didn't use appeal to personal authority that he could have. Like, he could bludgeon that to death, anybody to death with that, because he's got it. He could use that tool. And instead he said, "I'm not going to use that tool." So what does he say? And if you want the expanded version of this, navigating patterns, like and subscribe, right? What he said was, you know this, you feel this, you experience this. So if you listen to Maps of Meaning, the lecture series, you'll hear him say that over and over and over. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. You know this. I may be articulating it for you, but you know this. You feel this. You experience this. He says it over and over and over. He doesn't say, "I'm the wicked smart scientist and I'm telling you this is the way it is because I did a study." He's not saying any of that, which is amazing because he could, and he's not doing it. And it's not that he's not referencing his work. And you notice when he references his work, he says, "I work. My student, blah blah blah, did this with me."
He is very good. He is very good at that. And only it's far and few between at the time that he drops saying like, you know, I've done the studies, I've done the work, and it's usually if like he's like being very combative because someone's like digging. You're right that he's very good about that.
But see, most people miss that. I think even Vanderklay did that. I'm not sure he's still seen it yet. Most people miss those things. So you can't say, well, I watch Peterson and you watch Peterson, and now we quote know the same thing, because that's not the way it works. And other people can't articulate what they know. And I just went over this in my Follow the Fourth Estate video. Look, people vote with their feet long before they can articulate why they did a thing. That happens it doesn't happen 100% of the time, but you act first and you come up with the rationalization or justification later, right? And so it's important to realize that people responded to Peterson without being able to articulate what it was he was doing, and in some cases they didn't even see it. They were just enchanted by what he was doing, which was for the good. So I'm okay with enchantment when it's for the good, and I'm not okay with enchantment when it's not for the good.
May I add something as a newcomer here?
We've been looking forward to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. Wow, there's a lot. So I think that part of Peterson's charm is that there's this participatory aspect of it, where you don't just see him, but you see the people that he's working alongside of him. And so you see this building up of ideas. And I think that's quite beautiful. In a sense, I also see that here. Actually, when we talk about the channels in the Discord channel, I mean, I really didn't know anything about the Discord channel. I made an account on it because I felt sort of a push towards being more part of the conversation. And I was kind of sad that when I subscribed to the Bridges of Meaning, that was a little bit hard for me, because I didn't see a way where I could be part of a community and chat and have sort of a charitable conversation. And it was sort of by divine intervention that I saw this link, and I thought, okay, well, I might as just click and see what happens here. And so here I am. So I think that there's a craving in my heart, and maybe in people's heart, to build up through charitable conversation. And I mean, there's a lot of points that were said here. I was thinking about meaning and how, you know, how how different it is for people in the Western societies to be able to work through their meaning. I've read a book by what's his name, Robert Mulholland, who wrote "An Invitation to a Journey." I just want to share this real quick. He says, "We are also an informational functional culture. We seek to possess information, whether in the form of knowledge or in the form of techniques, in order that we might function more effectively to bring about the results we desire in the circumstances of our lives. We seek to be totally and completely in control of that process. But there is an even deeper dimension of this need to control. We tend to see such control as essential to the meaning and value and purpose of our being." And I see, I don't know whether it is building a better marriage or ideas. I'm wondering, you know, whether it is the meaning that is driving us, or whether we're creating that. So I'm just throwing that out there. I'm trying to grow here.
Can you just explain a little what you meant? Whether, like, that last sentence you said, whether it's something, whether it's the meaning or we're creating that. What do you mean by creating that? Creating that meaning?
Whether it is meaning that drives us towards a certain goal, or whether it is us that, well, I guess this would be more of a materialistic aspect, whether we assign meaning to things. I'm thinking of a rabbit chasing after a carrot in front of it, kind of thing.
Manuel, what do you think?
Well, yeah. So there's this problem, right? And Vervaeke actually run into this, right? He needed to extend rationality because he needed to solve a problem, and the problem was related to transformation effect, right? So if you're standing in front of a lake and you've never been in water, right? You can read books about swimming and like you can do everything. You can watch people swim, like, but you cannot get a sense of what it's like to be in the water. So we can't chase the meaning of swimming because like that's not real. Like that's just an imagination. So what we're chasing, right? We're aspiring to be a swimmer, and so there's a way, and the biblical language, it's like a vision. You have a vision of how the world could be, or how you could be in the world, better said, right? And you want to manifest the vision, and then manifesting the vision requires things of you, right? And the understanding of what it requires of you in a materialistic frame is like you have to move to a point with things around you, and then you're there, right? Like it's like there's nothing else that you can add because you ran out of material, right? And but like a marriage, right? Like what does a marriage require of you, right? Like you don't know. Like you fundamentally don't know, and you can't know. You have to participate in it, right? And then we're going to go to faith. We're going to go with hope, right? So effectively, you're hoping that your participation in the marriage will manifest the good, right? And then you act that out in faith, right? So you're participating in a thing that you don't have a definition for, effectively, because it's potential, right? Like you're engaging with the potential, and then, well, how do you participate in that potential? You participate in the potential through love, right? Like the love is the way of being, right? Or the way that you participate in being, that you trust to manifest that which is good. And I don't know if I answered the question.
Yeah, but so I want to frame it a little bit differently. I want to say, look, the problem of materialism is the problem of emergence over emanation. And then what happens with materialists is they get stuck with emergence as the primary way of relating to the world. But then, of course, that doesn't work because it doesn't work. Like everybody ends up in the same traps, roughly speaking. And so, you know, one of my great missions is to make final cause great again, right? Aristotle's final cause. Because everybody, emergence is working from formal cause. It's working from the beginning or some random arbitrary beginning, right? And it's not speaking to what's drawing you out. Because in Vervaeke talks this way, love draws you out of yourself. Yeah, it does. Well, something's drawing you out, it's not coming from within. Like definitionally, it's coming from outside. It's an emanation that is coming down to you and enticing you to go towards it. Right, so that's final cause. What is the reason as telos that I am pursuing what I'm pursuing? And so you can say, well, I want to swim for the joy of swimming. Or you can say, well, I've always wanted to go to that island, and the only way to get there is by boat or by swimming, and I don't have a boat, so I need to learn to swim, right, to get to the island. So you can say this, right? Swimming for swimming's sake and swimming for utility's sake are two different things, but they result in the same abilities. Like the world looks the same. It doesn't matter what the driver was in some sense, right? So that's really the issue, is that when you don't understand that there is emanation coming down from above and drawing you out, then you won't see it and it won't happen. But then you also can't explain anything that happens in the world, right? Because things aren't only happening through emergence. They're not only happening bottom up. And I would argue the important things are all emanation, and none of the important things are emergence. Which is not to say emergence isn't important. You need emergence, right? But the thing that's driving the emergence is the emanation, not the other way around.
Okay.
As in, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. So sticking to this subject, Mark, what do you think is drawing you, Emmanuel, out to? What compels you to make a community and to help people? Because this is what I've been hearing you
Yeah.
guys say. You want to help people. So what compels you?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we've been helping people, right?
Yes,
We just want to do it at a different scale, right? Roughly speaking. And we understand the scaling problem better than most of these people who think you can just do a circling thing and make everybody equal and all goodness will emerge. Like, no, that's not going to happen on average for sure. So what drives me is, again, the realization that there is a meaning crisis and that people can run into it and haven't solved it. Because for me, I solved it, and it never occurred to me that everybody else didn't also come to the same conclusions. So it was like, wait a minute, you guys are all stuck on a meaning crisis. What's going on? How can you possibly be stuck on a meaning crisis? It's easy. It takes 2 seconds to get out of the meaning crisis, right? Because from my perspective, it does. And everyone else is lacking this important framing, right? And you kind of see that, again, in the talk that Vervaeke did with DC Schindler, his little recent book hero there. You can see even DC Schindler had some bad framing. I'm like, why do you have bad framing? This is easy. And so what drives me is just wanting to help people out of that problem, right? Wanting to make that issue that I know something about, right? Because I got out of my meaning crisis years ago when I was homeless. I know something about it, to be able to share that knowledge with people and get them out of their situation so that they can grow and prosper. And that's my personal. I'll let Manuel go on about his motivations.
Well, yeah, I'm just an enormous idiot, and and I need to understand why I'm doing the things that I'm doing so I can get out of the meaning crisis. It's like I'm literally building my own path, and it's like, oh, if I build my own path, like, I know it's a good path because I know it, right? And I can share it with other people, right? And I think I have a responsibility. Like, if I'd met myself at 18 or 17 or whatever, right? Like when things started to go horribly wrong, right? And it's even 15, but whatever. Like, I knew back then, right? Like I've had conversations where I literally prophesize the problem. I even had some solutions where I'm like, well, those are pretty solid, but I didn't have ways of participating in the solutions that would get me anywhere, right? So I'm like, oh, like there's this whole extra layer of complexity, right? Where the way that you're engaging is more important than your engagement. and now I'm finding out the complexity of that engagement, right? And so I'm doing this meditation, and like I had this insane experience last night, which kept me up like almost all night. But I'm like, oh, like I guess that's possible, and it makes sense why it's possible, and it also makes sense that almost nobody has that experience, right? And then you get into this. Well, you get a humility, but you also get a navigating sense, right? You start to cultivate the ability to navigate how to have relationships, and you through talking you also navigate how you could transfer that to other people as well, right? And it's imperfect, right? And so when we were talking about a vision, right? Like, so you kind of need to create a vision. So if someone is standing here, right, you need to create something that's next to them, so that they can do the leap of faith in the thing that's next to them, so that the leap isn't too big that they fall apart.
So Manuel, a question about that. I'm gonna, and I'm glad to know you're an admin. I'll leave after this, and you could wrap it up, Mark. But the Chama writes of here is a follow up to another comment she said. But and leadership is a constant call to rise to a continuous set of occasions. So it requires, as well as builds robustness, support, courage, amongst other things, especially meaning. Now, I would ask both of you, like as a leader in a leadership role, but also say just as an individual confronting life. You know what I mean? There are continuous sets of occasions that come up and requires, this robustness. Now, and it says especially meaning. Now, the way it sounds like Nechama's framing it over here, and you could obviously interject, Nechama, is am I constantly bottom up, infusing meaning in so I could keep on going? You could be like, yeah, you could start that way, but that won't last long, right? In the sages say, "Metoch lo lishma ba mishma." From doing something for the wrong purposes, the right purposes will emerge. So you could come and say, like, I'm going to try to do this practice, and I'll get into the role. Or you could be like, I start bottom up, and ultimately I'll realize where they converge, where the emanation's coming down. Or while I build myself robustness and I constantly try to deal with these occasions, am I going to discover meaning?
Yeah, I mean, well, that's the problem. There isn't one answer, right?
I need one before I. No, I'm joking.
Right, but yeah, only one answer, please. Yes or no. Yes or no. Right.
I do have to run. I'll leave you on the note. I'm going to catch you up.
All
right, guys. This has been a pleasure, and
Thank you, Chizzy. It's good to see you. Yeah. I mean, I think again, it's not bottom up or top down, right? Vervaeke does a good job of this. It's both, and that's the problem. Is we all want an answer, and there might be an answer for you, but that answer might be unique to you, or unique enough to you, and that's where people don't like that, because they like their Western secular certainty frame, but that's not a useful way to think about these things, and that's where we run into trouble. And look, not everybody can be a leader, and not everybody who can be a leader wants to be a leader. So leadership, especially good leadership, is rare, and it just is what it is. Like, not everyone can. You can't train people into everything. You can't educate people into everything. Some people can be leaders and some people can't.
So the realization that I had is you have to build a base, right? And like I went there with what I want to do in the community, right? Like, I want to have the community build the base, right? And then when you have the base, you can go up, right? But you shouldn't go up faster than what the base can support. Right, and in some sense, the base should be way wider than what you're building up in the air. Because first of all, like, do you know what up is? It's like maybe a little bit, but definitely not sufficient to go all the way. And I think that's maybe one of the problems of Tower of Babel, right? Like, that there's too much upness and not enough baseness. And also, yeah, the word, that robustness, right? Like, I like to think in integrity, right? So integrity is in some sense the interconnectedness of a structure, right? And one of the problems with ideas I was like, how can you justify them, right? Like this, and Peugeot talks about is like, what is the ground that you're standing on? And the analogy that I started making with ideas is like, you just start building in a castle in the sky, right? Because like, you don't know where you're starting. Like, you're just starting somewhere, you're bootstrapping it, and then as a consequence of building and having the interconnectedness between that idea and another idea and another idea, right? Like, the integrity of that structure justifies the castle. Right? And at a certain point, that castle that you made out of clouds, it's rock solid, right? And at a certain point, the way that you're relating to the world, right, like, is rock solid, at least within your small ecosphere, right? And like, as well with community, right? Like you can build something that's rock solid, and then that from that base, right? Like, this is again the kid that's holding on to the skirt of the mom, right? Like, from that stability that mom provides, you can go into the world, and then you can go back in, and like, that's the pattern that you need to do. And if you go too far, too fast, right, that's Icarus, right? You fly too close to the sun, then yeah, like you're
somebody
gonna
has
fall.
to direct. Somebody has to direct the place that you're building, and that's really what leadership is about. Is that direction? Somebody has to make the arbitrary decisions that have to be made, even though they're arbitrary. Right.
And it can be less and more arbitrary depending on the wisdom of the person.
Well, but some decisions are just arbitrary, like, but it's not relevant because they still have to happen. So judging the leader's decisions is not a relevant way to approach the world, right? Because sometimes the decisions are completely, utterly arbitrary, but they still have to get made. And so the fact that they're arbitrary is not important because they have to happen, because that's how action in the world works. Action requires discernment and judgment. And so the fact of judgment in your idea of whether or not that judgment is right or wrong is not as relevant as you might like to believe.
Yeah. When I think of a leader, I think of someone who can call out followers, and at the same time can assign what they're most skilled at to do the job. And that's not easy.
That's not always the problem. Like sometimes the thing I'm most skilled at is a job that's already taken by somebody who's more skilled than I am.
Mm-hmm.
And then, right? And that's that's what people get upset about. They say, I'm better at that than this person. Yeah, but maybe you are and maybe you aren't. Like, first of all, maybe you're wrong. You're not better. That's the first thing that I think of. Yeah, maybe not. But also, if they're there, they're already better because whatever system they have is a system that's in place and working. And that's better than the system you have in your head because your system's not in place and working ever, right? So like there's more than just those considerations. You have to really consider all the constellation of what's going on. And that's why people have a problem because they keep thinking that they know how to run Elon Musk's business better than Elon Musk. Well, I know Elon Musk doing the wrong thing at Twitter. Really? That's your assumption? That's the last thing I assume when people talk to me about Twitter. I go, yeah, I think Elon Musk is doing a fine job, and I doubt anything you say is going to improve on what he's doing because I don't think you're as successful as he is by any possible measure, which is not to say that I agree with all his decisions or I think they're all perfect, but on average, right? And that's where the problem comes in is that, and people do this. People are critiquing Elon Musk right now. I'm like, who the hell are you to critique Elon Musk's business strategies and skills? Are you high? Like, what are you thinking? Do you really think? Really? Like, come on. It's insane. You're a nutty person at that point.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking about like a leader. He has to have the skill to supplement his own leadership, right? Because if he's gone, well, then
look, I don't think you can propositionalize leadership that way. Like, I just don't think it's possible. Leadership has lots of aspects, and some people are stronger in some of those aspects, and some people are stronger in other of those aspects. And that's okay, because leadership isn't one thing, and trying to reduce it or distill it down and do this reductionist trick is not going to work. And you can look, I've read leadership books, you can read leadership books. Some leaders are very good at leading strong personalities. We'll call them, generally geniuses tend to have strong personalities. But there's a style that goes with that. And those leaders are not good at leading other types of groups on average. There's not one key to leadership. It's not one thing. It's an identifiable property for sure, but it's not, you can't reduce it down. We love to reduce things down and oversimplify them, but that's not the right way to think about it. And yeah, I like this particular comment. Yeah, there's no difference between leading people and leading cats. None. They're both equally arbitrary. People are difficult, and because they know things. And like, I've talked about this before, but I can do accounting. I can do management. I can do programming. I can do the systems design work, right? I can run the payroll. I can do the marketing. I can't do them all at once, and it took me a long time to learn that because I tried. It didn't work.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with
well,
you.
Then which of those things in a business that I'm part of should I be doing? And am I the best person to make that decision? Because I don't think I am. Because the needs of the business have to match the needs of the people that are in it, and vice versa. And that's why you have to fire some people, even though they're useful. Like you don't just fire useless people, although hopefully you can do that. Sometimes you fire very useful people. Sometimes your best engineer is so annoying and disruptive that you have to get rid of him to get your engineering work done. I've seen that happen in software companies. That happens a lot more than you think, right? Yeah, he's just too annoying, and now we're just going to get rid of him, even though he's the best coder we have. Yeah, because HR sometimes trumps the tech, because it has to, because you can't rely on one person. This is like the basketball team that has one basketball star. That's not going to last. And maybe you need to rely on that one person, and maybe that needs to happen for a while. Like, these things are not easy. You can snapshot things in time, but that's not the way they are in reality. And that's where we run into trouble.
Well, I've seen lots of churches dissolve because people have an idea what a leader ought to be, and they're not happy with their leadership role, and so they leave. And churches
they won't
fall
submit.
apart, and not just churches, communities as well. And,
Right. They won't submit. We're living in a Protestant world where people won't submit. I agree. And that's a big problem, because all you're going to get there, because nobody's going to run a church the way you think it should be run, all you're going to get there is you running from church to church to church to church to church forever. That's all you're going to get.
There's no perfect leader. There's no perfect church.
Right. And if you're looking for perfection, you're going to be a Protestant rebeller forever and never be happy with the things that you have.
Or the way that you conceive of perfection is incomplete. Like, that's also right. Like, because what is it all doing, right? Like, especially in the church, right? What it's leading up to God, right? So you gotta judge things by whether they're fulfilling that, right? And then you can say, well, it's suboptimal, right? But it's like, yes, like a plant is trying to reach the sun, and like it's not having the optimal configuration to get to the sun because of weather. It's like, okay, but is it a bad plant? No, because it's being planted.
I don't know if you remember this, Mark, when we talked a while ago with Joey about leadership and like how the Discord was made, right? And it's like there's like a swirling of, like, we call it a spirit, but maybe an idea, something is there, and it's someone comes along and catalyzes it, right? They touch it and they make something out of them.
Or maybe many
nothing.
people. Maybe
maybe
it's
many
Jordan
people.
Peterson, Paul Vanderklay, and Joey all at once, right? Or all coming in succession.
But the point is that it can't just be this gyre of things. Someone has to come along and catalyze it into something.
So someone will.
Yes.
More importantly, someone will, right? This is the problem that people don't understand with let's say World War II, right? Someone did come along and catalyze something, right? And that structure that was easy to abuse was already existent when they came along. And then they were a really good leader, for sure, right? And that's the problem. Again, it is this reciprocal relationship, right? This cooperative relationship between the structure being there and the structure needing to change, right? And the person being there to plant the flag, and having a space for the person to plant the flag. Like, you just plant a random flag in a crowd, right? But this is the problem with mob mentality. Mobs go wrong because leadership is important.
Right. This make me think of the guy in the chat said something. Jesus is the leader, but if you want to frame it more generally, it's the leader comes and catalyzes the thing, but he doesn't catalyze it around himself to be a proper leader. He directs what's underneath to above him, whatever that is. If you're in a company, it's you take your group and you're leading them to the project you're doing or something like that, or the goals of the company, whatever needs to be done. But there was a reading, one of the readings at Mass today was from 2 Samuel, and it's about David. And It's about David, them crowning David to be king, which I thought was funny that this came up today. This whole leadership thing. It's here we are, your flesh and bone. In days past, when Saul was our king, it was you who led the Israelites out and brought them back. And the Lord said to you, you shall shepherd my people Israel and be the commander of Israel. And the elders came and anointed David. But it's Israel, right? What is Israel? It's a group. It's something. I don't know. But then someone comes along and boom, you're the king. Now Israel is real. So it's
Right.
something happens to it. And now it's real. Now it's forced. Now it's directed.
Right.
But David doesn't. It's not David that they're worshiping.
Right.
It's God created Israel, and David is now catalyzing
Right.
it.
Right. The
But
aim,
David is pointing to God.
Right. The aim or the final cause is already there, right? And that's what I'm saying about emanation needs to be taken seriously. And I want to address this. So, look, I mean, again, these reductionist ways of thinking about leadership, and this is the problem. There's a thing called leadership, and sometimes there's a leader, but more often leadership is spread out amongst many people, and that's why it's hard to tease out the difference between leadership and authority. And to your point, Casey, if you read Language of Creation, I believe it's page 85, somewhere in that area, where they talk about this, right? The stuff comes from the group, goes up, right? Right, and that's roughly the power in his model. I don't like that way of thinking about it, but at least the energy comes from the mob, from the bottom, and then it goes up to the head, and the head rains down authority, and the two rely on each other and reciprocally communicate in cooperation, and that's what it is. So a leader as a single individual is certainly somebody who does discernment, but authorities also do discernment. And so, for example, people might come and say, look, I'm the admin on this server, on the Awakening server. This person did this, Mark. What do you think? Now, I have no authority and no formal authority, no formal leadership on that server to do anything. I have no powers to do anything on that server at all. Explicitly on purpose, there was all dust up about this. So I said, fine, I won't touch that, which made me happy because I didn't want the responsibility anyway, right? But when I say I think this person is okay, right? That puts the person who is in charge, who is an official leader, one step further away from banning them. And if I say the opposite, it puts them one step closer. So I have some authority there, even though it's not formal authority. And leadership is much the same. People will follow natural leaders, irregardless of the structures that are in place, because that is a negotiation. And it is the negotiation or the intimate connection that actually matters. And that's not a one-to-one linear discrete relationship. Go ahead, Manuel.
Yeah, I wanted to introduce the binding aspect, right? So you bind yourself to the marriage, but the crown is also binding the head, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, it was mentioned earlier, right? Like it binds everybody to the one flagpole, right? Like the banner, right? Which is the crown, and it binds the person to the crown because it's like literally around his head, which is like a ring, but like a more important ring in some sense because it's not on the hand, but it's on the head, which is, I need to think about that more. Anyway, the binding aspect is is really important because that's the thing that gives coherence, right? Because you can say, well, we're this tribe or whatever, right? But like what sustains your identity, right? Like
right. Well, that's the realization or the manifestation or the instantiation or the materialization is the binding. And until the binding happens, those things it's not materialized, right? But there's a group of people and they're around some aim, and around comes a leader or multiple leaders with the same aim, but also the ability to lead. And then people give up that ability for them to critique, right? They drop the postmodernism. They drop the I'm smart enough to critique attitude and submit to that leadership. whether it's one person or two persons or whatever, right? They submit to that leadership. And that's the binding. The binding is about your intimate connection. That's what intimacy is. It's the relationship, it's the quality of the relationship that you have. And it's not our relationship, because we're talking about a community, we're talking about a group, right? And that's why that's important. But the binding is the thing that materializes or manifests the group.
So if you have like a village, right, and there's a bunch of people living together, like the fact that they're living together will emerge certain relational aspects, right? But when they decide to be a village, right, you get a spiritual village that is superimposing the material village and its emergence, right? And now the village has new capacity, right? Because like maybe you share with your village when you have affluence, but in scarcity you go back to your family, right? But now when you've bound to the village, you're like, no, like my survival is caught up in being part of the village, and like my family now extends, or my family relationships now extend into the village as opposed to just into my family.
I like what Casey said about King David. Our church is actually doing a study on 2 Samuel, and the funny thing about David is that he was the complete opposite of King Saul, and David by no means was an imperfect leader in terms of sinning. And other aspects that in my head doesn't make sense. 2 Samuel chapter 9, we have the story of Mephibosheth. And so Mephibosheth is the last son of Prince Jonathan. And so if you're a king, you want to get rid of your competition. And that's killing all the family. But King David accepts Mephibosheth as his own son and makes him sit by his side on the table. He had, I guess as a leader, he had to humble himself. And of course, there's a lot of imagery between Christ and King David and all that. But I just find it interesting.
Yeah, well, King Athelstan or something, I think he also did that move with the Vikings, right? Where he embodied the Vikings, at least for long enough till he was able to drive them out of England, right? So yeah.
And I was thinking of what the opposite case would be of someone like David, right? And what it is Napoleon is what I think of is the exact opposite. Someone who, instead of the people coming to him and crowning him, he crowns himself. He takes it over himself and he asserts his authority over that. But it's not something that was given to him and he graciously accepts or something like that. He takes it over for himself. Whereas David was basically forced to be king in like a humble state where he submits himself to the authority rather than the authority should submit to him, like in the case of Napoleon.
Well, I would say that King Saul also didn't want to be king. In fact, he wanted to run away from being king, and the prophet Samuel had to track him down. But one of the interesting things about the story of Saul is that whenever Saul would call forward for the Urim and Thummim to dictate what God's will was, God would be silent. He wouldn't speak to him. God's revelation was gone. But whenever David would consult the Urim and Thummim, God always spoke to him. I guess part of that is, if you drive people, if you are a dictator and you drive people away from you, well, then you won't find any consultation.
It depends what your purpose is, but yeah.
But I like what is it Hezi? Hezi? Is that how you say his name?
Yeah.
Hezi. I like what the questions he was asking you guys about, because this is kind of what I've wanted to ask is what are you actually like doing with this swirling gyre thing, you know, of whatever this little corner is or whatever. What's your catalyzation exactly, right? And you really nailed that down with you guys today, I think, and you did a good job. But we'll just have to see what the future holds, whether any of this is successful, how it goes, and I'm looking forward to that actually.
Oh, good. Yeah. I like the point you made too. I mean, I have a talk with Adam on my channel, actually, a rather long one about the French Revolution and the role of Napoleon putting the crown on his own head and things like. I'm sure Casey, you've heard us talk about that before on BOM. And yeah, I mean, it's important to know what people are doing and know what people have done. And look, if you say you're in this little corner of the internet or whatever, and you're not aware of what other people have done or what they think they're doing or whatnot, and you're not kind of looking for their input and feedback and help, then, what are you doing, right? Because either it's a corner or it's not. Like either we're cooperating together to manifest things and support each other, or we're not. And so that's actually an important factor, right? Because I try to support, like I said, I jumped in to support Jacob, because Jacob gets rather upset and sloppy with his language at times, right? And that's a specialty of mine, is sort of trying to disambiguate a little bit on the language side, right? I support Paul as much as I can. I'm in his comments, right? I support Karen Wong in the Meaning Code. I've been on her channel before, right? I support Andrew with the Bangs. I've been on her channel before, right? I've commented on some of her videos as well. I don't watch everything from everybody by any means, right? I support John Vervaeke, right? I support Jordan Peterson. I support these people. And I think that, we do better when we're all supporting each other and trying to find ways to cooperate better. And it's upsetting to me that there isn't more of that going on, right? Because we need more of that, not less. And I like the fact that Catherine did the Thunder Bay event, and I really appreciated and enjoyed being there and meeting people that I met there, some of whom were unexpected, right? But I want to keep that momentum going at the same time. And, I'm doing my best. There's a lot of competing factors. We all have stuff going on in our lives, right? We all have other priorities, right? And we have to continue to support the people we support. But yeah, I mean, we're working on stuff. We have been, we've tried things before and not had them take off for this very reason. Like we just don't, you have a bad leader, like he's not going to lead you to the Meaning community. We tried the Meaning community, it didn't work. So.
And people not believing in what we're doing, right? And like, so if there's frustration in us, I think that's where the frustration is, right? Like we have these ideas, right? We have reasons, and then people want to do what they want to do, and they do what they want to do, and it's like, okay, but I have better, and they're like, no, I want to do my way. It's like, yeah, but better. No, my way. And then it doesn't work.
Well, and worse, what you see is they get upset because you won't do their thing their way. And even like with religion that's not a religion, the Written Art Project. Like Manuel and I disagreed, and yet we still helped them, and they were nothing but ungrateful. Nothing but ungrateful. That's all we get. Which is fine. I mean, I'm not upset about it. I'm amused by it. I think it's funny, but people won't even accept the help that they get, or when they get it, they denigrate it because they wanted to do their thing their way. In other words, they want the image of the world in their head to be the world that they inhabit phenomenologically. And reality is that which objects to that image in your head. That's what reality is. It's the thing that objects. It's not objective. It's not a space you can inhabit to know things. It's the thing that pushes against your idiotic idea of the world. Because we're all idiots when it comes to, we all know so little of the world that if you actually understood that, you'd live in horror, right? Save for the light of God or something, if you want to be Christian about it, right? Or Jewish about it or whatever, right? If you want to be religious about it. But that's the problem, is they don't want to submit. They want to have it done their way, and worse, they want you to do it their way under their guidance without them even, they don't even want to claim to be a leader because they don't want the responsibility. Fair enough. I don't want the responsibility either all the time, right? But they do want you to do it their way.
Well, I think there's this ungrateful task of being an avatar of reality, right? Which is maybe literally the same as embodying Christ. I don't know, like, but yeah, like people don't like that, right? It's like if what they can't do what they do, and the reason that they can't do what they do is because you're the messenger, right? Like, then they shoot the messenger because they don't have reality to shoot.
Right.
I don't know. Like Jacob has this fear of a civil war, right, happening in the United States, and because of all this stuff. But I think a fear that's more, I don't know if I want to call it a fear, something that might happen in this area of the internet or whatever, is that if somebody doesn't like catalyze the leadership of this, somebody may come and take over. Somebody who does not have good intentions for the people. That like, something political might happen, basically, and it may somehow be taken over by, like, you know, the mooks who are looking for somebody to submit to might just submit to this person who's looking for.
Right.
Well, that's why you need the base.
That will happen. That will happen. When you have a mob, the mob will take action. Now that's going to happen, right? Now, will that result in a civil war? Probably not. But I mean, this is the sort of thing that Jacob's fears are born from and justified by, right? For sure, right? So I don't want to say like he's totally crazy and being conspiratorial. He's not totally crazy. He's not being conspiratorial. It's still on the table, right? And just like World War III over Ukraine, it's still on the table. Look, if we all pull together, we can make World War III happen, guys. Or not, and I prefer the latter, the not part, right? So that's the thing. I mean, this goes back to Jordan Peterson. Everything you do matters. Yes, it does, and that's the problem, is that it can go any number of different ways. We don't know which way it's going to go. There's no way to predict that because there's way too many free variables for anybody to calculate. And that's why people put things in political frames or in economic frames, because it gives you the illusion of prediction, right? Or perfect prediction or something. And it's an illusion. And yeah, this is where the danger is. We get paranoid, we get suspicious, we get skeptical, the hermeneutics of suspicion kick in, right? And this is not healthy, because when we're looking for the things that break us apart, we're not looking for the commonalities that can pull us together, right? When we're looking down at our feet, eyes down, you know, we can't look up and see where we're going. And so both those matter. You have to be able to look down and you have to be able to look up. You can't do one or the other.
And with everything we do matters, right? Like the binding is the point that we realize that what we do matters, right? And that's where all the anxiety starts bubbling up. Okay, like I'm binding myself to this, then I have this identity, right? And it's like, oh, right. Fuck, right? Like, do I want to have that identity? It's like, yeah, but you already have it, right? Like you're just affirming what's already true.
Yeah, you're not getting out of having relationship with yourself, with nature, with others, right? You're not getting out of that. Like that's a condition of having been born, all right? And then the question is, what do you do about it? Are you taking responsibility? Are you realizing that those relationships are there? Are you acknowledging the intimate connections that you have as a result of being born? Are you taking them seriously? Are you doing things with them? Or is it all rejection and rebellion and no, I want it my way and the world has to work a certain way? Because it could be either. I don't know which it is, but that's important. That's important to know.
Yeah, I really feel like we need each other to make better sense of the world, and build a map of the world. And individually, there might be concerns about what I feel the map looks like and what it actually is. But I just want to thank you guys for allowing me to be part of this. It's been quite a while since I've tried to be part of the conversation, but it's very difficult for me to find a way. But thank you. I think this is something special, and I think that more people need to share, at least, or more people need to let go of their, I don't know, some self-sacrifice would be good.
It's a solipsistic worldview. It's what they need to let go of, their solipsism.
And
Yes.
when you use the word map, a lot of flags go up in my mind, right? Because
Well, it's a start. It's a start.
it's a good start, but the better way to think about it, it's like an interface, right? Like you want to have the right relationship to the world, right? And a map is a good start, right? It's like, because now you're relating to things in the world as opposed to chaos, but the right relationship is in the participation.
Yeah. It was nice to have you. It was good to have your input. So it's always good to get guidance from people.
Yeah, thank you. What else? I think I was going to say something else. I think you guys are doing the best you guys can, and it, I don't know, it just makes me all warm and fuzzy inside, seeing how much you guys care about this. You probably already know this, but I'm a little bit concerned. You know, you can't be at all places at once, and it takes a lot of you. So it's one of those things difficult to navigate. But I'm here. I would like to be more part of this conversation. I think it's for the better.
Yeah, we'd love to have you, dude.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the feedback. I do appreciate that. Those are
And
very
I also want to point to Paul, right? Like, that's true for Paul as well, right? And we need to realize that, like, he's doing what he can, and like
Definitely.
he has to juggle his priorities as well. And he cares. Like, he definitely cares.
I did subscribe to Navigating Patterns.
Oh yeah,
thank
and the other channel is Agapic Orientation, which is a little bit different in style, but
yeah, it's quite different.
Agapic orientation.
Agapic.
Agapic. Okay.
Agapic orientation.
I'll put it in the chat. So
yeah, put it in the chat. Yeah, and my channel is more around cultural cognitive grammar, which is one of the problems where Vicky identifies, and Manuel's more focused on conversation and personal transformation sorts of issues. But yeah, I think we're gonna shut the stream down pretty soon here. So last comments.
Well, I'm gonna put my stuff in the chat, so it needs to.
Well, do that while people are commenting. Get on it. You should have these things ready at hand. Come on, Casey.
I think if you guys can put forward your vision of what you're trying to do, I think it's going to do a lot of good for a lot of people. And I hope that it works out. At least, even like most of the problem with these sorts of things is scaling, right? And I hope you guys, if you can nail that, I mean, it's going to take the little things, there's 16 people watching or whatever. It doesn't even have to be about like viewership counts or whatever. It's, if you can do more good for more people, it's just going to make things so much better, even if it doesn't stop whatever's coming, whatever the hell that means. You guys are putting more good into the world, I think. So thank you.
I'm just gonna put it in the comments as opposed to in the chat. So I'll do it after.
Not prepared. Someone's not prepared. But,
no, I the chat ain't loading for me, so I don't.
Not a load the chat. That's terrible. Any closing comments here before we take off there?
Yeah. So I'm gonna put the Discord link also in the comments. I think it's important to realize that your participation is important, right? Like if people don't do things, things won't happen. And as a consequence of the participation, you'll become a different person, right? And you'll see things that you haven't seen before. So like it's an invitation.
Well, thank you guys. I gotta go, but hopefully I can join in sometime.
Yeah, welcome to join us as much as you'd like. And yeah, I appreciate everybody's participation and feedback. Feedback's always important, and
that is a way of participating.
It is a way of participating, right? And whether it's comments in YouTube channels or it's involvement in chatting streams or whatever it is, I encourage people to get to the level of participation they can handle, even if it's just listening for now, right? And move your way up the participation scale so that you can eventually get to the point where you can do more good for more people. Because ultimately, I think Manuel and I are aimed at the good. We have stuff coming. It just everything is slow and everything is way harder than it should be as we deal with the decay of the world in some sense. So bear with us, but there'll be more coming. And have a great evening, everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your weekend. And I hope to engage with you all soon, however you wish to participate.
Thank you.
God bless.